While we see some people arguing, someone reflects that revenge only brings more revenge, and that true revenge, in fact, was forgiveness. It is also possible to notice that this person was addressing these words to his father, who was no longer on this earthly plane. The scene then shifts to a young man with parted hair fighting someone. The other man, whose hair covered his eyes, appeared to be his son. The scene returns to the moment when a gang war was happening in front of a building with the sign Unjin. In another place, a young man wearing a dark suit informs his boss that all preparations have been completed. The man, who was praying in front of a Buddha statue, seemed to be the president. He appears thoughtful but decides that he already knows what to do. Looking back, he reflects that when you look closely, revenge always fades away. Amid heavy rain, several men in suits were attending a funeral. While delivering a speech, the president orders his men to head to a certain location. Sometime later, a gang is seen walking together through the city. On a sunny day, a beautiful city landscape can be seen. In the middle of that city, a young girl wearing a hood runs desperately carrying something. Sometime later, she approaches a place that resembled a bar. Upon entering the bar, a blonde woman informs her that they were not open yet and asks if she needed anything. The stranger replies that she was looking for Amber Tiger. She removes her hood, revealing a swollen eye, and states that she heard she could find Amber Tiger there. However, the bar owner asks her to leave, explaining that hiring him was very expensive. Even so, the young woman places a sum of money on the counter and says that she could pay. Crying on the floor, she declares that if it was not enough, she could work to pay the remainder. For her only wish was for Amber Tiger to eliminate Gunter for her. She explains that Gunter was the one who sold her to a brothel after murdering her husband and son, and she could no longer bear the existence of that man. The bar owner, upon hearing this, realizes that Gunter was a successful mafia boss in the eastern region, and asking for his head with only that amount was quite bold. She comments that in the past she would have refused this offer, but upon reflecting on her past, she changes her mind. Then we see our protagonist, the so-called Amber Tiger. The young man remains silent but nods, indicating that he accepts the job. The blonde woman then informs the desperate girl that she was lucky that day, because either way they needed a head like Gunter's, a head worthy of Amber Tiger's retirement ceremony. In an extremely luxurious hotel, all the lights were on. Inside, an intense shootout was taking place between several individuals. As the gunpowder smoke begins to dissipate, a man's bullet-riddled body becomes visible. However, someone was using that body as a shield. Our protagonist emerges from behind that person and advances toward the shooters. In the blink of an eye, he manages to grab one opponent's weapon and strike him on the head. When this man's partner tries to retaliate, it is already too late. He starts shooting at Amber Tiger, who uses the bald man as a shield. Once the opponent runs out of bullets, Amber Tiger sees an opportunity. He then uses the back of the pistol he had taken to strike his enemy, knocking him out. After taking care of his target's henchman, he heads toward where Gunter is. Contrary to what one might expect, Gunter seemed completely calm, as if it were just another ordinary day. While smoking a cigar, he asks if the assassin in front of him was indeed the famous Amber Tiger. It is then revealed that his real name is Kim Shin, and Amber Tiger was merely a nickname. Gunter comments that it was surprising that an assassin of such caliber was just a young Asian man. He then suggests making a deal, offering 10 times what was paid for his head. He says that all Kim had to do was walk out the same door he entered and he would pretend that nothing happened. He also adds that despite being part of the mafia, he was a man of his word and would honor the deal. However, Kim seems indifferent and simply refuses. The man gets angry and tries to draw his weapon to kill Shin, but before he can even react, a knife flies into his throat. After finishing off his target, our protagonist walks over to his side. He seems to look out the window, staring at the scenery in view while deep in thought. In his mind, the young man simply states that revenge could only be bathed in blood. Sometime later, we see Kim taking a shower to wash the blood from his body. While doing that, the boy is smoking, deeply depressed about something. In one of his memories, he recalls a man telling him to go to Hoenn because their Shin would find a way to defeat those guys. Pensive, the boy concludes that he's finished his preparations and there's no longer any reason to keep delaying his fate. So after his shower, he gets dressed, putting on his elegant suit. The blonde woman from the bar says he did a good job. She also explains that she placed the payment and the information that came from Korea inside his bag. In addition, the young woman mentions she arranged a new identity for him, similar to the previous one, just as he had requested. Lisa, intrigued, asks what he plans to do after completing his revenge. But Kim seems focused on his objective and simply replies that he hasn't thought about that yet. The woman then says that if he has nowhere to go, he can always come back because he'll always be welcome there. However, Kim just starts walking away, showing an apathetic, emotionless face. Watching him leave, Lisa thinks to herself that she knows he wouldn't say he'd return, even if it were a lie, because not only does he not lie, he's heartless to the end. Our protagonist then gets into a car while checking the contents of his bag. With a piece of paper labeled Project Castle in his hand, the boy seems lost in thought. He begins to explain that Castle is a secret organization operating on the 71st floor of the Castle Hotel in Gangnam. And this organization was an alliance of all the hotel's bigwigs working in construction, commerce, and financial industries. But its true form was a national crime syndicate. Shin starts to recount that 8 years ago, a detective who went against that syndicate was brutally murdered. Because you can't beat that kind of people with justice alone. they won't fall apart just because one or two authorities step in. And there was only one way to bring down that organization: gather people who held grudges against them, and use your own hands to do the job. Still holding those documents, Kim thinks that he ended up returning to the place where the people who killed his father are. Looking out the window, he seems lost in thought about that country. At Incheon International Airport, we see a plane beginning to land. Our protagonist had just arrived and remains silent, focused on his goal. On TV, the news starts reporting on current society, and the reporter mentions Kim Jae-hoon, owner of a construction company. The man also reveals that President Kim has been making donations to cancer patients. Then see that man smiling for the cameras. But in a flashback, we see that same man telling Shin that he had made a mistake, and saying that he would regret it for the rest of his life for having pissed him off. Then we see Shin beaten on the floor, and Jae-hoon adds that he was a pathetic wretch. Back in the present, Kim reflects that it was at that very moment when everything happened. As the news continues on TV, our protagonist says that on that day, his life descended into the depths of hell. However, he doesn't regret the choices he made after that, because this will be the beginning of damnation. Shin gets into a taxi and asks the driver to take him to Hoim. The man seems suspicious of Shin for some reason and asks if he has money for the trip and if he lives there. But Kim just hands him a good amount of money and tells him to drive and shut up. In the blink of an eye, the car speeds off toward Hoim. The boy in the back seat grabs his phone and prepares to make a call. He calls an old companion named Jin Tae. Tae, upon hearing that his friend is there, is surprised. But Shin doesn't care much and just asks how his investigation is going. Jin reveals that instead of an investigation, it turned into a cleanup because those bastards attacked him. And looking at a man lying on the ground in front of him, he asks whether he should lose his mind while doing this. But the protagonist says it's still too soon, and the guy lying in front of Jin turns out to still be alive. The psychopath asks if he can do whatever he wants with those guys and then starts stomping on his opponent. But Shin asks his friend to keep those guys alive for now. Seo, who is Kim's right-hand man, agrees with his boss's orders. After the call drops, he turns to his enemies in front of him and asks what they're doing. And while warming up for the imminent fight, he begins to wonder if that neighborhood is dangerous. But when he gets no answer, he seems irritated and turns to aggression. As he walks through the streets, Shin explains that Hoim was the city with the highest crime rate in the Republic of Korea. That city was full of homeless people and criminals, and it used to be his mentor's hideout, and also the base of his territory. He finally arrives at the place where Jin is. The boy's right-hand man is sitting calmly after defeating most of his enemies. He raises his hand to signal his boss until an opponent behind him moves in to attack. But our protagonist saves his subordinate by throwing a bag in the goon's face. Without hesitation, Kim charges at the conscious thug, kneeing him and knocking the guy out. He explains that what that guy did was hold his breath to hide his body from the enemy. Seo, surprised by it all, asks how that bastard managed to do it. But ignoring him, Shin asks if the worms on the ground were all the flies, and his right-hand man confirms. However, Amber Tiger notices something and points ahead, asking who those guys are. Seo is confused when he sees yet another gang approaching that area. The protagonist refers to some lists and thinks the guy was on it. Hae-Ju, the leader of that gang and rank 4 of DS security, realizes that for some reason, Shin and Jin Tae aren't running. The long-haired guy thinks that people like them are too arrogant and act like they own the place. He then declares that the territory belongs to Yeon Deok, but at that moment, a blade flies in his direction. Hae-Ju barely manages to dodge it by tilting his head and saving his own life. After throwing the knife, Seo simply states that the guy talked too much. Offended, Hae-Ju curses at Jin Tae as he begins to draw his switchblade. But our protagonist asks him not to do that. With a threatening expression, the boy warns that if he pulls that weapon, he'll die. Still, guarding his territory and honor, Hae-Ju doesn't comply and even with a threat, draws his blade. He claims that those bastards think he's an idiot and furiously orders his men to attack the two immediately. He also tells his thugs to tear Jin Tae and Shin to pieces, and the henchmen charge at our protagonist and his right-hand man. One of the guys, a redhead with a bat, tries to hit Shin, but he easily ducks under the swing. And as a counterattack, he lands a clean jab to his opponent's face. Without hesitation, he immediately strikes another of the thugs with an elbow. And to finish the third, he lands a solid punch to the man's stomach. Hae-Ju, seeing his subordinates being defeated, is shocked. In fear, he draws another switchblade and asks Shin who sent him there. Shin analyzes his opponent and realizes that even with 2 knives, they're not weapons that cause much damage. So he already knows what his first move will be, and the boy ducks, dodging the initial strike. He also predicts that Hae-Ju will throw a jab, so he reacts quickly, blocking and striking his opponent's arm. With that, he uses the same motion to land a clean punch, smashing Hae-Ju's face. The punch is so powerful, it sends the man stumbling backward. After his enemy falls unconscious to the ground, our protagonist remains calm. After defeating Hae-Ju's subordinates, Seo comments that he did most of the work while his boss just got the fun part, saying that was very selfish. But Amber Tiger ignores him and simply walks off, telling him to leave. Seo then starts running after his boss, wanting to know where he's headed. Jin Tae starts walking beside Shin, and sometime later they approach a dark alley. The blonde man says that's where his boss stayed for a while. Our protagonist immediately recognizes the pawn shop. The two of them begin to enter the place. Seo notices that the place was beautiful but completely messy and run down. Our protagonist finds a photograph on the ground and gets ready to pick it up. Upon closer inspection, we see a child next to an adult man who seems to be an old acquaintance of Shin. Looking at it, he says it had been a while. Suddenly, Seo approaches his boss and whispers that they had company, asking him to keep his guard up. From the darkness, someone begins to reveal themselves. The long-haired man says he didn't want to have to clean up corpses and then asks Shin and Seo to leave the place. However, Jinta seems confused, recognizing that person. The blonde begins to say to the long-haired man that he was Pei Wujin, disciple of Master Minseong, and that he was the one in the photograph they had found. But Seo ends up pointing his finger at Wujin, which doesn't please him at all. In the blink of an eye, a closed fist comes flying toward the blonde as if trying to hit him. Wujin notices something and is shocked by that bastard. It's revealed that Shin managed to stop Pai's strike. The long-haired man, furious, says it'll be worth it to kill those two guys. While holding his opponent's hand, our protagonist thinks that this guy was the first disciple of Kang Minseong, and probably the first weapon to bring down Castle that he'll have to recruit. However, Shin releases his opponent's hand and reveals that he didn't come there to fight. Seo, holding a bag in his hands, throws it in front of Wujin. Then it's revealed that inside the bag was a huge amount of money, which makes Wujin pause. Amber Tiger says he knows Pai is highly skilled, and if he's got nothing better to do, he should join him. But the long-haired man doesn't seem impressed and steps on the money. As he approaches Shin, he asks the bastard if he really wants to die. Even so, our protagonist is unfazed and asks if that amount was too little for Pai. But tired of the conversation, the man tries to attack Shin, who manages to defend himself. The boy then uses a move to immobilize his opponent's elbow. After locking him down, Shin says P was being very rude to his guest. But Wujin tells Shin to take his hands off him, and right after, he breaks free from his opponent's grip. After being thrown a few steps away, Kim manages to catch himself on the ground. But before he even notices, a foot appears near his face. Being extremely skilled, Amber Tiger manages to block Pai's kick. The boy, furious with this pointless fight, just stays on the defensive. Still irritated, Wujin asks if that was hospitable enough for him. He keeps trying to hit Kim, who only defends against the blows while thinking this was going to be tough. While dodging a punch by moving sideways, the boy thinks that either way he came there to test that man. Shin gets close behind his opponent and says he's cornered in a dead end. However, Wujin proves not to be some amateur and manages to spin using his heel to kick his enemy in the back. After defending against the blow, Shin thinks it was as expected, and that guy wasn't someone he could go easy on. So the young man delivers a kick to the base of his opponent, managing to throw him off balance while grabbing his pants leg. As he falls to the ground, the long-haired man thinks that guy suddenly changed, and for some reason that technique felt very familiar. Taking advantage of his opponent's fall, Shin prepares a punch to end the fight. He then strikes Pai, who was already on the ground. However, we see that even lying on the floor, Wujin managed to defend himself. Surprised, Kim thinks that even while falling, the guy stayed alert and blocked. His fundamentals were strong. He also comments that Pai had learned properly from Kang Minseong. Still wearing that apathetic expression, the long-haired man asks what the boy was doing. He kicks our protagonist backward, who crashes into a shelf. Getting up, the boy comments that he's never seen Kim before, but the guy seemed like a disciple of Kang, because his fighting style was very similar to his master's. That's why Wujin asks if Shin knew Kang Minseong for some reason. Amber Tiger simply replies that he owed Kang a favor. At that moment, Pei realizes that Kim was a follower of his master. As the man walks past Kim, the boy says he was in the wrong place because he didn't want to get involved with those people again. However, Shin doesn't listen and speaks the name of the organization, Castle, and just hearing that makes Pai completely furious. Our protagonist reveals that what he wanted was related to them, and in addition, he had something to say about Kang Minseong. That's why he says it would be best for Wujin to hear him out and then make his decision. The guy seems more willing to accept. As he walks through a door, Pai says he would only listen to what his opponent had to say. Seo, confused by the whole situation, asks if they should at least eat while they talk, because he was really craving a good steak. Sometime later, the sound of a grill sizzling can be heard, and we see several pieces of meat being prepared. Seo is completely silent, just enjoying the delicious food. Sitting across from Pai, Shin asks if the place is safe, and the long-haired man, while looking to the side, responds that it'll be fine because the owner is trustworthy, even if he's a bit unpleasant. But before talking, Wujin asks what happened, and why Shin was there instead of Kang Minseong. Seo seems saddened by that question and asks if he should tell the truth. His master, however, decides to answer and reveals that Kang Minseong is dead. Upon hearing that, Wujin appears in disbelief and goes silent for a moment. Completely confused by what he just heard, the man asks what he means. The protagonist then reveals that Kang Minseong was murdered. In a flashback, we see Kang hiding behind some trees, being hunted by several soldiers in white uniforms. As he sighs, we hear a gunshot, and Shin concludes that it was Castle who did it. Woojin still doesn't believe it and once again asks if that person is really dead. Furious, the man asks how he could have abandoned him like that. However, Siu doesn't take it well and tells him to watch his words because his attitude is irritating him. But that only makes Pai even angrier, and he glares back with a psychotic expression. The man reaches for a chopstick on the table, as if getting ready to fight. Jin Ta notices what he's doing and prepares for combat. Quietly, he begins to draw his dagger, ready to start a fight. However, our protagonist stops him and tells Woojin that he doesn't know what his relationship with Kang was. But just like Pai, he also lost everything, including his master. So Shin asks if he could live with that, knowing Kang is dead, while the ones who killed him are still ruling the world. As he pours himself a cup of sake, the boy says he came there for one reason only. With confidence, he declares that he's going to take over Hoim, and to rise to the top of the world, he'll start with that as a first step, because his goal is to destroy Castle for everything they did. Noticing that his anger is getting the best of him, the young man calms down and then tells Pai that to accomplish this, he needs him. However, Woojin seems to snap and starts laughing maniacally. With a mocking look, he asks if Shin really thinks he can take over Hoim, saying that even with those skills, it would be hard for the boy to control even that neighborhood. As he walks away, he tells Kim to forget about it, because if he crosses his path again, he'll kill him. Siu doesn't seem upset about Pai leaving and simply says his personality was rotten. Thinking back on what the guy said, he wonders if he should have just killed him. However, Kim says Woojin is probably just in shock, since they were Lycan once too. That's why he asks his subordinate to give Pai some time to think. Still, in his mind, our protagonist thinks that even so, nothing good ever comes from being late. The cook of the place approaches the table and while serving food, asks if they were disciples of Kang Minseong. After saying that, he sits down and tells them not to worry about Woojin because it'll take him a while to calm down. After showing that he had listened to the whole conversation, the man pours sake into his glass. He says he's furious about it, also commenting that he can't believe Kang is dead. But then he throws the sake from his cup onto the floor and says he hopes Kang is resting in peace. Still confused by the situation, Shin asks if the man was close to Kang. The muscular man replies that Kang was like an older brother to the local troublemakers, and also an old friend of his. The cook also reveals that Woojin will end up helping the two of them, because Kang was like family to him. Therefore, he asks Seo not to hate Pai too much, since he was a complicated guy. The man also concludes that before all this, they needed someone to guide Shin and his right-hand man, and in fact, he knew the right person for it. However, Kim responds that it would be problematic if that person wasn't as strong as Pai. But the cook counters by saying that in his opinion, they were still a bit clumsy and shouldn't always rely on their fists. That's why he would show the boy someone who has all the information about Hoim, and that person was the daughter of the former owner of Hoim, whose power had been taken by DS Secret. Sometime later, we see a car workshop with several people gathered. Among them, a black-haired girl pulls out a cigarette to smoke. After taking a drag, she says there are so many crazy idiots in that neighborhood it's surprising. A rough-looking man starts staring at the woman without saying a word. Chasumin, who was the current boss of the Bujin faction and daughter of the former leader, asks the pig why he was looking at her. The big guy with a mocking expression asks why she took so long to get there, because of which he had to hurt her subordinates until she arrived. Kang Man-jae, the leader of DS Secret and Rank 3, is stepping on some of Cha's henchmen. One of them apologizes for making the lady come all the way there, calling her Miss. And hearing that, the girl seems to get thoughtful. Kenny tells the girl there's no need to talk and the only thing he wants is her junkyard. And if it goes smoothly, maybe they could even enjoy some time together afterward. However, in the blink of an eye, the young woman throws her cigarette and charges in, trying to punch her opponent, who manages to dodge. Still, even leaning his body back and avoiding the punch, he ends up getting his face cut by a blade in her hand. Even so, being a boxer, Kang immediately leans in and lands across to the girl's ribs. This causes Che to immediately collapse to the ground, injured. Looking at Cha, Man-jae says she should just follow his lead since he doesn't like hitting women. But the girl clearly isn't open to conversation and just curses him, calling him a pig. At that moment, the man moves to slap the girl in the face. Suddenly, one of his henchmen who was patrolling the junkyard gets knocked out. Seo, standing next to his boss, comments that things are getting pretty intense over there. Cha, seeing those people arrive, asks who they are. And with all his drip, our protagonist asks who there is the successor of the Bujin faction. Stu-min seems to recognize Shin as soon as she sees the boy's face. The two lovebirds look at each other for a moment as if they already shared a connected past. In a flashback, Shin had just stepped out of an alley, and when he turned, he came face to face with Cha. The boy stared at the girl who had just finished beating up some young women. While wiping the blood from her mouth, Sumin didn't say a single word. Back to the present moment, Seo, realizing that his master and the girl know each other, says this will be easier. The girl, confused, asks why he's there. However, not leaving room for chit-chat, Kang grabs the girl's hair and tells her not to get distracted. Furious, the man demands to know who those two bastards are, since they'd never seen them before. Stuman struggles, asking to be released, completely enraged. Shin, irritated by the scene, gives the order to his right-hand man to attack. He also tells the guy to hit that pig hard, and Seo, angry at the situation, agrees. However, his master asks him not to use weapons since it would get noisy if he used a knife, and the man replies that he understands. At that moment, our protagonist turns and kicks one of Kang's henchmen full force as he was approaching. Seo, without hesitation, charges at the big pig to end the fight. The man doesn't seem very intimidated, saying that bastard really doesn't know fear. Jinta gets close enough and Man Jae tries to hit in with a jab to the face, but the young man dodges it. Seo yells that he talks too much and calls the man a pig. Then the blonde retaliates with a punch, which Kang blocks. Even with the big guy blocking his strike, Jinta doesn't stop and lands a kick to his opponent's rib area. Due to his extreme resilience, Man Jae manages to withstand the blow, but still shows signs that it hurt. Seo then uses his speed to deliver several blows without giving that boxer a chance to breathe. After taking all those attacks while only defending with his guard, the pig asks if Jinta is finally done. At last, he counterattacks, trying once more to punch his enemy, but Shin's right-hand man proves very skilled, dodging to the side again. The young man charges in, taking advantage of his opponent's opening. He throws a high kick at Kang, who barely manages to block it. With a mocking tone, Seo says he was just warming up. The pig keeps trying to land punches, but he's far too slow, and this time the blonde ducks easily. Jinta retaliates, landing a solid punch to the stomach of that damn pig. While dodging attacks with ease, the boy thinks that guy is a little slow, but very tough. Man Jae, even after taking several hits, remains unfazed and says Seo is a dishonest bastard. The blonde realizes that at this pace, it would take more than a day to defeat the guy. So he says he doesn't care anymore and decides to take action, then starts charging at his enemy. The man, seeing the boy approach, gets ready to punch. But upon closer look, he sees that Seo has just drawn a knife and is planning to stab him. So he immediately drops his guard, unsure how to react. Seeing that opening, Jinta reveals it was just a bluff and starts spinning for a kick. After a few spins, he jumps in the air and lands a direct heel strike to the man's face. Even being extremely resilient, the pig can't withstand the power of the blow and collapses to the ground right after. Seo turns to his master and says it's not like he actually used the knife. Still reluctant, Shin agrees, saying he did well. Then the boy turns and looks at Cha. The girl, seeing she's being watched, looks away. Later, while smoking, she's surprised that Shin is really alive. She comments that she thought the boy was dead because he disappeared so suddenly. Our protagonist simply replies that dying wasn't easy. Stu Min, hearing that deep line, stays silent for a moment. Confused, she asks why he's there and what made the boy seek out a gang leader. Shin reveals that he wanted to make a business proposal because he's planning to take over Hoim and needs all the power and information he can get his hands on. That's why he wants the influence of the Bujin faction. Upon hearing that, Che realizes the boy found her after 8 years just to make a business proposal, but also notes he wasn't being honest. The girl reveals she already knows the protagonist's real goal, because instead of Hoim, he's after something darker. And the boy's target is Kim Jae-hoon, who's behind everything. With a serious expression, she asks if the boy is finally going to get his revenge after all this time. Shin, hearing those words, stays silent for a moment. Coldly, he says he just needs information on Hoim and DS secret and also manpower. He also states that he'll pay, and not only that, the girl wouldn't have any trouble if she accepted the deal. Tempted, Cha replies that it's not a bad deal, but she has one condition. She wants the boy to protect that junkyard because it's important to her. Shin then replies that he'll do it. Sumin also says he should keep watch there at all times because just like he saw, enemies can show up at any moment. With a sly smile, she asks him not to be scared, leaving the boy confused. Right after, the girl stands up and asks him to follow her, saying she'll leave him a free room. Staring at his old friend, Shin thinks he didn't expect her to accept the deal so easily. So he figures she's planning to watch what he and Seo will do. And as always, she's extremely cautious. Jin-tae appears confused by the whole situation. We then cut to DS secret, and the boss of the place asks if those guys who attacked Kang were part of Cha's gang. We see that Man Jae's henchmen are completely stripped after being beaten up. Kang is giving his report on the situation covered in blood after the beating, and he says it was the first time he saw the guys who attacked him. The boss of DS secret, irritated by the situation, thinks there isn't a single day where the neighborhood is peaceful. Furious, the man questions why the neighborhood has to be like this just to be Dajun's subordinate. The director of DS Secret simply responds to his boss that he's sorry. The president turns and says he could crush the insects that did this, but that action had consequences for them. Seeing that their boss is furious, the president's subordinates become extremely tense. Kang, who is the main one responsible, looks completely devastated, unsure of what to say. The man then reveals that his honor had hit the ground with the shame they'd brought upon themselves. Yun Deoksu asks Man Jae if he can still call himself part of the Deoksu family after that. Bleeding, Kang apologizes and asks his boss for forgiveness, calling him Kyunnim. However, grabbing a trophy beside him, the man tells his subordinate he has no right to call him that. Enraged, she strikes at Kang's head without hesitation. Deoksu lands a clean blow to the side of Man Jae's head. While beating his former subordinate, the man says that if you can't solve it with words, you solve it by beating someone to death. Seeing their boss's cruelty, everyone around becomes completely shocked and intimidated. After finishing Kang, the man sighs in an attempt to calm himself. He calls Manjai a pathetic bastard while snapping his fingers at one of his subordinates. The guy rushes over at full speed to light his master's cigarette. Young calls for Da Jian, who quickly steps forward and asks what he needs. And so the man orders Da Jian to take care of the people from the Bujin faction. Upon hearing that, the scarred man replies with a sadistic grin that he'll take care of it. Early in the morning, we see the junkyard that belonged to Cha. Seo and the girl are sleeping inside her house. Our protagonist, already awake, is standing in front of a few cars. While meditating, the boy thinks that 8 years have passed. He imagines himself with a knife in front of a person, wondering if his blade will ever reach the people who killed his father. After taking a deep breath, he attacks the man in front of him, who quickly counters. A knife fight breaks out with the two evenly matched in strength. Our protagonist is wounded in the shoulder, but he manages to retaliate, wounding his enemy as well. After that battle, he returns to reality, and we see that he was only training in his imagination. The young man senses someone approaching and asks who it is. We see that behind him stands Da Jian, Yun's henchman. A scared man stares at Shin for a moment. While smoking, Da Jian says that he really can fight, and it's no surprise that Kang lost to him. Kim seems to recognize the man and asks if he's alone. The guy replies that it would have been troublesome if he brought his crew along. Da Jian prepares to deliver a message and asks Shin to also share it with the people in the junkyard. Then the man says that if the boy wants to live, he should leave that place by sunset. After saying that, he takes a breath and thanks Shin for letting him witness his skills. He also says that Kim could become a leader wherever he goes, just not there. And if he sees the boy there that night, they'll kill him. Shin doesn't seem intimidated at all, saying there are guys like him, gangster wannabes who think they rule everything. But he's completely wrong if he believes that. The young man also states that if he is a gangster, then he should act like one and not go around causing unnecessary chaos. The man shows an angry expression upon hearing that, but he begins to walk away, saying that this really is interesting. Finally, before leaving, the man warns that he'll see Shin around. Kim, on the other hand, just watches his potential enemy walk away. He thinks that in DS Secret's food chain, that guy is ranked second, which means he's very different from Kang and the others Shin defeated the day before. Also, looking at the cigarette the man threw on the ground, the boy says Da Jian is very cautious. Sometime later, inside the junkyard, we see a meeting of the Bujin faction. Lee Cheol-min begins his presentation about DS Secret. He explains that the company used to be a smaller organization called the Eastern Faction, but 2 years ago they took over Homim in the blink of an eye. He adds that Yun Deok-soo was famous for his strength, but someone was behind him, and they only managed to expand that far thanks to the Hassan Construction Company owned by Kim Jae-hoon. The man also states that there were a bunch of organizations in Hoim, but now most of the area belongs to DS Secret, and they've taken over a large portion of the local trade. Sure, here is the full English translation with line-by-line spacing and no omissions. Especially the illegal part, Sue questions whether they really sold that stuff, since a company controlled by the construction firm shouldn't be involved in that. Cha interrupts and says that kind of trade brings in good money, and they have politicians backing them to cover up the crimes, and that, in fact, it was just a front corporation. Because in the end, they were criminals, and at that moment, another member of the Bujin faction asked the protagonist's right-hand man if they had a plan. The Bujin faction's advisor, Shin Won-il, adds to that by saying that compared to DS Secret, they were nothing. However, this time it's Shin who interrupts, saying that he won't be able to win if he keeps talking like that. The boy comments that money and numbers don't mean anything, and to defeat someone, you have to find their weakness. And after that, you have to eliminate them with one swift move. As he stands up, the boy explains that Jin Ta would help them because his goal was to acquire some drugs. Soo-min asks Kim what he was thinking of getting involved with that kind of thing. The guy explains that he was trying to find DS Secret's weak spot. As he takes a picture of Da Jian off the wall, he adds that this way he might figure out how to take those people down. Shin shows the photo of Da Jian to Cha, explaining that he met that guy in the morning and mentions they're planning to return to that place at night. Upon seeing that photo, Shin Won-il recognizes Da Jian, calling him a bastard. The protagonist asks his colleague if she knew that person, and the girl replies yes, since that neighborhood was basically his turf. However, she explains that now is not the time to worry about drugs in case those people come back, and asks Seo to stay and defend the junkyard. But Kim says he'll take care of Da Jian, and the girl should help Jin Ta get the drugs. Cha, worried, asks the guy not to confuse Da Jian with someone like Kang, because he was very different. However, Kim responds that he knows, but it's still too early for them to use all their members. The young man also explains that in a week, he was planning to get rid of DS Secret and wipe them out from Hoim. Everyone in the room is completely shocked when they hear that, except for Seo, who knew his boss's potential. Sometime later, in front of DS Secret, we see a few bodyguards protecting the entrance. One of them spots a guy in flashy clothes and asks who he is. He tells Jin Ta, who was undercover, to wait a moment and asks the guy if he had booked an appointment. But playing the role of a snobbish playboy, Jin Ta asks if the bodyguard knows his uncle, who's the CEO of the J group. Upon hearing that, the two guards at the entrance don't recognize that group. Still in character, Seo insists the guards should read more news to know who owns a global conglomerate. As he walks past them, the boy also tells them to open the door and says they'll regret it if they don't. After entering the place, she informs our protagonist that Jinta is inside. She asks if she can really trust that guy. Shin responds that she shouldn't worry since Seo is a scam artist specialized in infiltrating places, and Cha asks how things are going with the boy. The guy replies that everything was going according to plan and he would call later. At that moment, a group of thugs led by DS Secret arrives at the location. Our protagonist notices that for some reason, Dajian wasn't with them. Shin steps out of the car and asks the group of thugs where Dajian is. The leader of the group responds on behalf of his underlings and says Kim is pretty brave to be standing there alone. The guy explains that Dajian was a bit busy, so he came there himself. Then the psycho asks if everything's alright since they were both supposedly on the same level. Kim realizes that this person wasn't on his intel list, and the nutjob says this is going to be even more fun than if Dajian were there and he'd make sure of it. Shin tells his opponent that there's no need for small talk and they should get straight to the action. Then as he takes off his coat, he tells his opponent to come at him. Feeling challenged, the psycho smiles and then tells his subordinates to attack our protagonist. So the wannabe gangsters charge at Kim without having any idea of his real strength. The black-haired guy just stares at his incoming enemies without reacting. He decides he's going to put an end to this and then charges at them. With a knee to the stomach, he's already able to immobilize the first of his enemies. After that, Shin manages to dodge an attack from the other gangster's bat. Right after, he strikes back with a punch that twists the bald guy's neck in front of him. The last enemy tries to attack Kim with a knife, but the boy is quick and moves to the side. With that motion, the young man takes the chance to immobilize his enemy and disarm him. Without hesitation, using the guy's own arm, Kim breaks it. But he realizes that wasn't all, and sees someone advancing beside him. The leader of the group tries to kick Kim in the face, but the boy with speed manages to casually block it. The psycho, thrilled by all the action, says that if he didn't do this, he'd die of boredom. In ecstasy, he doesn't stop and quickly goes for a punch at Kim. Even dodging, Shin can't counterattack because right after he has to block a knee strike. As he raises his hand to strike back, a foot suddenly appears near his face. By pure reflex, he blocks it, preventing serious damage. Still, from the impact, the boy is thrown a few centimeters to the side. The tattooed man asks why they're not taking that fight more seriously, but our product stays silent. The fight continues, and all the thugs who are with their leader are now just watching the brawl. We cut back to Jinta, who is invading DS security. Inside, all the women and waiters start greeting the boy, thinking he's someone important. A black-haired girl starts complimenting the redhead, asking who he is. Seo introduces himself, saying it's his first time there and he just wants to have fun, asking the pretty lady to show him around. Falling for his charm, the girl starts walking to take the boy to a place. Elsewhere, we see a woman fawning over Jinta, and the completely shy boy tries to resist the temptation. He thinks that the woman beside him is exactly his type, but he knows he can't do this. The woman, confused, asks if the boy doesn't like her since he won't even look at her. The redhead quickly replies that she's extremely beautiful, but he came there to see someone else. The woman then asks who that person is. Seo remembers some instructions given to him by Cha. The boy then asks the girl to call Susie. However, the woman plays hard, saying she doesn't know that person. Being a smooth talker, the boy realizes what she wants and places a wad of cash on the table, asking her to think again. Even so, the girl still seems reluctant, saying that the person he's looking for doesn't exist. But the boy counters that she's getting it all wrong because that money was for Susie, and hers was what he had in his pocket. Then he pulls out an even bigger wad of cash. Immediately, the woman gets up, ready to accept the offer. She takes the money and asks the boy to wait there for 10 minutes. Jinta, seeing that his plan worked, just agrees. Outside the place, Sumin is in the alleyways of a building. Even without looking to the side, the woman senses that person really did come. Then we see Wu Jin wearing a coat, arriving and walking toward her. The girl says she heard about what happened and asks if the boy is okay. He replies that she doesn't need to worry since he always thought of his master as dead anyway. The boy leans against the wall, asking why she was following those guys. And he also asks what they plan to do after getting the drugs they wanted so badly. But Che says she still doesn't know, but those people were highly skilled and probably had a plan. Wu Jin simply replies that they can't be sure of that. She asks if they can talk later and also if the boy could go to the junkyard, since our protagonist would probably have trouble handling Dajian alone. However, when she looks ahead, she sees that the president of DS Secret is arriving. The bodyguards at the location welcome President Yun. Completely confused, Sumin wonders why the hell Yun Deok-soo and Kim Dajian are there. On the other hand, he keeps smoking his cigarette with a blank expression. Inside the building, you can hear a party going on in a room. Jae-hoon, while helping himself, asks his servant if Mr. Yun is still on the way. The boy apologizes and says the man just arrived. Yun, knowing he was late, starts running so as not to keep his guest waiting. He opens the doors to the room with a very irritated look on his face. But then the young man smiles happily upon seeing President Jae-hoon there. However, a glass full of liquor flies toward him and hits his face. Jae-hoon, furious for having waited, states that he didn't come there to play games. Even after that offense, Yun doesn't seem interested in retaliating, so he simply bows, welcoming Jae-hoon and apologizing for making him wait. Still, Jae-hoon isn't satisfied and says that if Yun is truly sorry, he should kneel with his forehead to the floor. We then learn that this man is the president of Hasan Constructions and the sponsor of Yun Deok-soo. Jae-hoon remains silent, simply waiting for his subordinate to do what he said. Da-jin, on the other hand, looks at his boss, curious to see what he will do. Yun, despite his fury and clenching fists, doesn't know what to do. He begins to lower himself as his superior starts laughing. The well-dressed guy says he was just joking and asks if his subordinate was really about to go through with it. A friend of Jae-hoon comments that Yun is a really nice guy and asks his colleague if he can ask him for a favor. Jae-hoon allows his friend to make a request to his subordinate. However, another man present asks to go first, saying he has a troublesome inspector and wants Yun to get rid of him. Da-jin lights a cigarette for the man, and then hands him his president's business card so he can contact him. Yun, who was furious just moments ago, collects himself by sipping some soju. Right after that, he tells the man to call him if he really needs that service. Jae-hoon, realizing Deok-soo is in the palm of his hand, gives a small smirk. While getting ready to leave, the young man calls for his subordinate. The president of DS Secret promptly responds, eager to hear the orders he will receive. The construction boss then states that Kang Chang-seok has been released. Jae-hoon also explains that the man had been chosen as a model prisoner. With a serious expression, he approaches his subordinate and tells him not to delay the cleanup of Hoim any longer. It had already been 2 years since Yun decided to take over that city, and they still hadn't managed to complete it in that time. Because of that, people were probably starting to think poorly of him. Finally, he declares that this is Yun's last chance to get it done now. With a serious expression, the man simply responds to his master that he understands. Then he bows, waiting for the young man to leave. Down the hallway, Da-jin is walking. Nearby, Jin-ta is just observing the situation. In his mind, he thinks he came there to see if he could find anything useful, but that this situation is dangerous. And you shouldn't even imagine that there were 3 of those kinds of people there. So the boy concludes that he should probably get out of there quickly. Still, he thinks that Kim Da-jeon being there means the boss is having another problem now. Back to our protagonist's fight. Once again, that lunatic tries to hit him with an attack. After blocking his opponent's strike, Shin quickly counters, but that too is blocked. Then the crazy guy he's fighting bends down and tries to deliver a kick, but misses. As that intense exchange of blows continues, the lunatic's partners just watch. But they decide they've been too passive and want to take action. During Shin and the lunatic's fight, one of the wannabe gangsters walks toward them with a knife in hand, ready to end it. However, someone tells him to put the weapon down. Lee arrives with a need of his gut, asking how he dares wave a knife around in someone else's territory. One of the thugs, confused, asks where those people had come from. Won-il also reveals himself and asks the surprised guy if it was his first time seeing a gangster. After putting on his glove, Won-il calls the guy a bastard and immediately punches him in the jaw. The hit is strong enough to drop the beanie-wearing guy to the ground. In his head, Won-il thinks that those guys aren't part of Yun Deok-soo's group. They just seem like ordinary street thugs. But before he can think more about it, an attack comes his way, but being extremely skilled, he dodges it. He counterattacks and knocks out his opponent in the blink of an eye. After thinking for a moment, he realizes that the one who came there was actually that guy. And that person was Kim Seong-jun, the bastard who was fighting Shin. At that moment, Seong starts landing several blows on Kim, who only defends himself. Shin remains calm even in that cornered situation, just waiting for an opportunity. He sees an opening and dodges to his opponent's side in order to counterattack. However, Seong doesn't seem satisfied with that and then tells Shin to stop trying to run. After saying that, he kicks our protagonist in the face, who ends up having to defend himself with his arms. Determined to put an end to that, the boy says he has seen enough. Suddenly, a movement happens and a few drops of blood fall to the ground, but we don't know who they belong to. Seong, with a bleeding nose and totally confused, wonders how that guy changed so suddenly. We see Shin standing imposingly in front of his fallen opponent, and angry, he demands to know what his deal was. Chu doesn't seem satisfied with the outcome of that fight and is overtaken by rage. He curses our protagonist while drawing his blade and charging at him. However, Shin already knows how to handle that and easily immobilizes his opponent's arm. The boy twists Seong's arm, disarming him and making the guy feel enormous pain. Confident, Amber Tiger gets ready to finish the battle once and for all, stating that it would end right there. With Seong's arm immobilized, he prepares to break the bone, but someone yells for him to stop. One of the members of the Bujin faction asks if he could let Seong go, pleading for Shin to do it. Upon hearing that, our protagonist is quite confused, not understanding why his allies asked him for that. She arrives at the scene after completing her mission, and as she comes out from between the cars, she asks Shin to let Seong go. Arriving with her are Jin-ta, now without his costume, and Woo-jin and Sumin, who says she'll explain everything to Shin. Our protag and Pai exchange a look, as neither of them really like the other. Sometime later, we see that Woo-jin, Sumin, Jin-ta, and Shin are gathered to discuss the situation. Woo-jin, as arrogant as ever, asks why Kim is even there, since he already warned he'd kill the boy if he saw him. Jin Tae raises his hand and interrupts the conversation, saying he wants to speak about that. With full sarcasm, he starts mocking Woo Jin, saying he's not the strongest one there and therefore can't challenge anyone. Hearing that, P begins to lose his temper, and the blonde concludes that if he didn't like it, you could just fight him. However, Amber Tiger holds back his underling, saying he wants to hear the explanation first and asking him to calm down. Stumin agrees, saying that before laying it all out, she wants to confirm something. She says that if they really end up beating the crap out of Yoo Deok-soo and Kim Jae-hoon, the city of Hoeim will be free to take over. That's why she wants to know who will take over the city after they accomplish their goal. Seeing that, the prodigue seems quite surprised and then comments that he'll give the girl half of the city's rights, but Hoeim would be his. At that moment, Pai can't stay quiet anymore and steps forward, grabbing Shin by the collar in an attempt to intimidate him. Furious, the guy says that didn't sit well with him and he's not happy at all with the prodigue's attitude, stating that Jin Tae asks if Pai has a death wish. With a blade pointed at Woo Jin's stomach, the young man demands to know whose outfit he thinks he's grabbing. Even in that situation, Kim doesn't seem concerned and simply says he's going to take Hoeim. Then he slaps Pai's hand away from his collar. With an intimidating look, Kim tells Cha and Woo Jin that they know how dangerous it is to be the city's boss. Pai, hearing that, doesn't seem convinced, but he doesn't interfere. Cha, on the other hand, agrees with the situation and says everything's fine. She understands what Kim meant and says that's why she'll give him an explanation of the situation. Jin Tae and Pai calm down and step away from each other. Sumin begins to explain that she knows our protagonist came there because he knew Woo Jin was Kang Min-seon's disciple. But what he didn't know was that besides Woo Jin, there was one more disciple of Kang, and that the boy had probably already come across that person at some point. Somewhere else, we see a place closed off by a gate. A woman with white hair and wearing a lab coat opens the door. Lee Rae-won, who is a tattoo artist by day and an underground doctor by night, asks her patient why a woman had to be the one to open the door for him. Seong, after being treated, leaves the place and simply thanks her for the help. Lee, concerned, asks if the boy had started doing that again. Worried about him, she pleads with the boy to stop or else he would end up in a really bad place. But irritated with the situation and wearing a serious expression, the boy asks her to leave him alone. Suddenly, Da Jian shows up, grabbing Seong by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Irritated, the scarred man demands to know why the boy went to the junkyard. Intimidated, Seong replies that he went to the junkyard to finish the job Da Jian failed to do, and he questions whether Yoo Deok-soo was going to just turn a blind eye to that, putting Da Jian in a tough spot. The man simply responds that he would decide what happens with that, and if the boy interfered again, he would kill him. Da Jian also turns to Lee and says that if she was planning on causing trouble there, she should get lost. The doctor, on the other hand, tries to calm things down, asking him not to do that in front of her because she wasn't planning to treat any patients. Seong then frees himself from Da Jian's grip. As he walks forward, the boy tells Da Jian to do his job properly, because just looking at him was disgusting. Even after being insulted, the scarred man remains silent. Watching the boy walk away, he's left speechless. Back to Cha, she concludes that Kim Da-jian was Kang's second disciple. Upon hearing that, Jin Tae simply can't believe it and is left confused by the situation. Sumin adds that Shin had fought that night with Kim Seong-jun, Da-jun's brother. She also adds that Seong-jun was originally part of the Bujin faction, and in fact, Woo-jin, Da-jian, and she used to be friends. However, around 4 years ago in a flashback, we see Kim Da-jian asking someone to help him just that once. The young man says that at that rate, those bastards are going to kill his brother. We then see that the person receiving that plea for help was Cha Il-guk, Sumin's father and the leader of the Bujin faction at that time. But the bearded man responds that Seong-jun had to deal with that himself. That was the rule. He then asks his subordinates to take the boy outside. As Da-jin is forcibly removed, he asks Il-guk how he could do that. Outraged, he says his brother sacrificed everything for him and was being treated that way. After being thrown out onto the street, the young man is left lost and calls the faction members who rejected him bastards. Suddenly, Da-jian hears the sound of a very familiar motorcycle engine. A guy arrives on the scene and asks the idiot what he was doing lying on the ground. The biker says that they never ask anyone else for help. We then see that it's Woo-jin, and the guy tells Da-jian that the two of them are enough to handle anything. We jump to the temporary headquarters of the Orient faction, Club Queen. Suddenly, a leg kicks the club door open, busting it down. Some gangsters inside are confused by the noise, wondering who just came in. While tying his hair, Woo-jin says there are too many people there, so he'll hold them off while Da-jian finds his brother. The boy thanks his friend for the help and asks him to hold on a little longer. But enraged, Pai doesn't care about anything and just charges at his opponents. Seeing him approach, the Orient faction gangsters are confused, asking if those people were from the Bujin faction. But there's no time for talk as Pai immediately smashes two of the thugs' faces with punches. Without stopping, he knocks down another enemy, sending him crashing to the ground. And when facing the third, the young man is even more aggressive, slamming a kick into the enemy's ribs. All the gangsters in the place rush at Woo-jin, but he's not intimidated by it. Even with two guys coming at him, he counters, knocking one out with his foot and immobilizing the other with his arm. However, the young man realizes it won't be easy and notices movement to his side. A gangster with a bat tries to hit Woo Jin, who barely manages to block it, but his arm gets injured. After breaking the enemy's bat just by defending, Pai is now furious. And to retaliate for the pain in his arm, he lands a cross punch straight into the thug's ribs. Dae-jin wasn't doing so well either, having to lean on one of his enemies to kick the other one beside him. The boy kept moving forward, trying to find his brother, even using his opponents to leap over them. After getting past two more enemies, the boy continued running forwardly. One of the bald gangsters cursed Dae-jin and kept chasing him, trying to bring him down as he climbed the stairs. However, before the guy could reach Dae-jin, Pai showed up to save him, grabbing the thug's leg and dragging him down the stairs. The thug from the eastern faction was thrown against the ground, hitting every step and getting badly hurt. Woo Jin warned the gangsters nearby that he couldn't kill all of them, but he'd make one thing clear. Anyone who came at him would definitely lose their life. But since they were thugs, his enemies were intimidated and charged at Woo Jin all at once. The boy didn't flinch either and ran back into the fight. After a long battle, one of the remaining gangsters called Woo Jin a stubborn bastard. Pai, on the other hand, having already fought several enemies, was badly hurt and completely exhausted. One of the black-haired thugs got irritated, saying it was getting tiresome, and charged at the boy with a knife. But the boy managed to lock his opponent's arm, disarm him, and punch him in the chin right after. Even so, Pai was clearly exhausted, but he knew he couldn't let his guard down. Another gangster with a bat tried to put an end to the fight. To respond, Pai threw himself to the ground, dodging the strike, and then kicked the Eastern faction thug in the face. Holding on to his support beside him, he said it still wasn't over. And no matter how many people showed up there, he'd keep fighting. In his head, the boy thought it was going to be hard to get out of there if they stayed any longer and wondered what that idiot Dae-jin was doing. Suddenly, someone with an intimidating presence arrived, saying that Woo Jin had really messed up that place. The local gangsters realized it was their leader, and we saw that Yun Deok-soo was the boss of the Eastern faction. Yun ordered Pai to leave before he changed his mind since Dae-jin had already finished. Coming up behind him was Dae-jin, completely injured and wrecked. With his face all beaten, the boy asked his friend Woo Jin for them to leave. The long-haired one was completely confused, not understanding the reason for that decision. As he helped his friend, Woo Jin asked what was going on and where Seon-jun was. But Dae-jin didn't answer and just said he needed to be away for a while. He apologized to his friend because he had helped him a lot that day. Cho then concluded the story saying that after that, Kim Dae-jin disappeared for a while and came back 2 years later, becoming Yun Deok-soo's dog. In other words, Dae-jin probably did all that to keep Seon-jun alive. Hearing all of this, Woo Jin was clearly upset. He asked why Sumin wouldn't stop, saying she was talking about unnecessary things. But the girl disagreed and said Shin needed to know the truth, because Shin and the Bujin faction were now in the same boat, and upon hearing that, Shin didn't deny it. She declared that they wouldn't hold back anymore and would fully support Shin and Jinta to take control of Hoim. Jinta, hearing that, commented that the girl seemed really excited about it. Pai, not seeming to agree with the situation, asked if Cho was crazy and why she was trusting a stranger like that. The girl, furious, responded that it had been a long time since those guys turned Hoim into their playground and the Bujin faction couldn't do anything about it. That's why they needed to bring Hoim back to what it once was. She also said they would support Shin until all outside factions were out of Hoim, and the price would be half the rights to the city. And after saying all that, she asked what the boy thought about the situation. Though reluctant, he accepted, making Woo Jin even more pissed off. Pai looked suspiciously at our protag, still doubting him. Some time passed, and we saw Jinta saying that sucked because he really wanted to punch Pai since he was an arrogant bastard. Still, he was surprised by that woman since she seemed fine with it. The boy also wondered why she trusted them so much, but Shin replied that she wasn't doing it out of trust, then asked if he had brought the item. Jin promptly answered that he had brought what his master had asked for, and pulling something from his jacket, he commented that getting it wasn't easy at all. He also states that Kim Jae-hoon was there at DS Secret. But of course he didn't do anything since he knew Shin wanted to handle it with his own hands. Still, the boy says he doesn't understand why Kim was waiting so much, since they used to handle things much faster. Hearing that, Kim seems even more irritated with the situation. The young man throws an object to Jin, and the blonde asks what he's going to do and if he should send it to the madam. Amber Tiger orders his subordinate to call Krat, and hearing that, Jin Tae realizes things are about to begin. Then Shin says that from that moment on, everything would change, because now he understood what Kang Min Seong was talking about that day. The next day, we see someone leaving his house in the middle of an alley. Dae-jin was getting ready to start his day, already smoking. The man thinks that his brother didn't fight Woo Jin the previous day because if it were against Pai, he would have backed off. And he also wasn't hurt by Woo Jin because that wasn't his fighting style. So he concludes that Seong must have fought that guy, our protagonist. On the street, while waiting for Dae-jin, some goons greet him good morning. However, Dae-jin walks right past them without getting in the car, saying they were going to patrol Bojin-dong a bit today. The man begins walking while some of his subordinates follow behind him. As he walks through the area, he hears someone begging for more time. This person pleads, saying he'd do anything to pay the money as he's being beaten by some gangsters. The poor man says he'll be able to pay next month and begs the loan shark to give him more time. But the man beats the poor elder and says no, because he's been stalling too much with that payment. Next to him is Hayeok-ju, the man who got beaten up by Shin the other day. While getting hit, the old man says they're all going to hell because all the money they have comes from beating up innocent people. But before the loan shark can continue hitting the old man, Hayeok-ju tells him to stop. Then coldly, the long-haired man kicks the old man in the face. Meanwhile, the old man's wife is wondering what to do, but another gangster is intimidating her. Hayeok-ju says they aren't stealing since the money is theirs and they only lent it. Furious, he grabs the old man by the hair. Then the guy tells the elder that it looks like he's not thinking straight because of his age, but if he can't pay, he should just hand over the store to them. Without a shred of mercy, once again he goes to attack the defenseless old man, but someone tells him to stop. Da-jin, who had arrived on the scene, says he'll handle it for Kim, so Hayeok-ju can leave. The other faction goons bow to the director. Hayeok-ju, furious, says he didn't even want to do that because it wasn't even his area. It was all because Da-jin wasn't doing his job properly. Still, not in the mood for chit-chat, Da-jin calls his name again. With a frightening expression, he says he already told the man to leave, and the long-haired man says if he's saying so, they'll comply with the order. But bumping into his superior, he says that every time he acts like that, he wonders if they're really on the same side. Before leaving, the long-haired man also says that eventually you're going to have to deal with it, mocking Da-jin on his way out. At that moment, the wife rushes to the old man in desperation, asking if he's okay. Da-jin calmly asks if the man can get up. However, even injured, the old man says he doesn't need pity from a gangster, because he's no different from that bastard. Da-jin's subordinate gets angry seeing that because the ungrateful man had been helped by the director. But Da-jin tells the young man not to do anything, and then decides to leave. Sometime later, we see some weapons laid out on a cloth. It apparently belonged to our protagonist, and the boy is cleaning one of his blades. In a flashback in front of his master, the boy wonders how he could defeat the guys from Castle. Kang explains that he should start by building his own power because there are a lot of skilled guys out there who could help him. And the man also says he can't help him anymore from now on. He must do his best, because Kim will definitely find a way to defeat those bastards. After remembering that, the boy seems deep in thought, not even knowing what to say. Suddenly, someone starts knocking on the door, calling for him. Appearing at the window is Jinta, who says those people were there. Looking at someone in front of him, the blonde comments that Krot was pretty fast for someone with short legs. Then we see a short man with a huge bodyguard on his back. Krot, a former assassin from Bar Iskra in Russia and current broker of the place, says he didn't expect to meet him there. The man also says it's been a while since the last time he saw that person. And then he calls Shin by his nickname, Amber Tiger. Amber Tiger, with his usual apathetic expression, comments that it really has been a long time since he saw Krot. Jinta questions why the shorty didn't mention him and asks if he was invisible. The ex-assassin says that Amber Tiger's absence in Vladivostok must be huge. And the boy asks how Korea was treating him and if he was enjoying the place. Krot promptly answers yes, because he's getting plenty of work and consequently making money, and he even got himself a bodyguard. Jinta, on the other hand, questions what kind of assassin needs a bodyguard with him. But changing the subject, Krot asks what he can do to help our protagonist. Then suddenly, Jin throws a vial with pink liquid toward Krot. The man catches it, and Shin asks him to find out where that object came from. Examining the vial, Krot immediately realizes it's Fika. The ex-assassin comments that since Shin never showed interest in that area, he might not know, but that item is very popular in the alleys of Russia. And also because that belonged to a certain someone, Pitin. And hearing that, Jinta and Shin are completely alarmed. Finally, Krot concludes that the item was from Bak Du-chan. The Russian also says that as Amber Tiger knows, all the tech they used was invented by Bak Du-chan. Besides that, there's no way to escape Pitin, no matter how hard they try, and he warns that it's dangerous for Shin to get involved with him, even if he is Amber Tiger. But the boy replies that he already knew that, however, it couldn't be avoided. With the hunter's aura, the boy says he has a few things to settle with Bak Du-chan. Krot tosses the vial back to Jinta while saying he understands, and if that's his will, then he should go ahead with it. Before leaving, the man also says that if the boy needs anything, they can call on him. The assassin also says that if the boy needed it, even Krissa and Medvedi could help. And as he walks away, he says he'll pray for Kim's safety. While walking out, his bodyguard says he's heard the codename Pitin before, but he thought that person had retired a long time ago. Then he asks Krot if that doesn't mean Amber Tiger is better than Bak Du-chan. The short man replies yes, because Amber Tiger is the best assassin he's ever seen, and he never got to witness Pitin's skills firsthand. However, Pitin is the first person that comes to mind when you say the word assassin, and he was the embodiment of that word. Krot states that if Pitin, known as the legend of that side of the world, and Amber Tiger, who currently holds the best skills and talents were to fight, it would be a tight battle, and one of them would definitely die. With a smile on his face, the Russian declares that either way he couldn't help but get excited about it. The bodyguard then asks who the bold yellow-haired guy next to Amber Tiger is, wondering if he's Kim's bodyguard. As he gets into his car, Krot just says that Jintad's a collector, leaving the bodyguard confused. The giant says he heard that guy wiped out an underground organization with only 2 knives and asks if he's really just a collector. Krot replies that maybe he's annoying, but he's extremely skilled with blades. That's why he asks the man not to act rashly around him just because of the way he looks and his attitude, since the bodyguard's head could go flying in an instant if he let his guard down. And after that, he tells his man to stop talking because he wants to leave. They had a lot of people to deal with. Elsewhere, we see 3 men in suits and another car approaching them. 2 small groups stare each other down. The bodyguard and the man in white drop a backpack, and after opening it, he reveals that it contains the 10 kilos of fika they had requested. The other 3 men in suits from DS Security place 2 briefcases on the ground. However, the drug dealer seems irritated, kicking the bag and dropping some fika rocks on the floor. Confused, Dajian asks if the man was dissatisfied with something. The redhead replies that the price had gone up and they should take only half the fikas. However, one of the gangsters comments that they had made a deal at that price last month and there was no way the cost had doubled. Irritated, the scowling man replies that if he didn't like it, he should have asked Kim Jae-hoon to come in person. And once again, he tries to complain. Suddenly, the guy in white grabs him by the neck. The barista, who is also the fika dealer, says the gangster is annoying as hell and asks how he dared to talk back to him. Dajian, trying to avoid a conflict, bows. He asks the barista to forgive them and then says they'll take only half. The gangster, who was choked, apologizes to Dajian, saying it was his fault, he had to lower his head. Dajian comments that his subordinate doesn't seem like himself and asks if something happened. The man replies that nothing happened and once again apologizes for bringing personal issues to work, but Dae insists he talk. So the gangster reveals that it's nothing, just that his younger brother recently started using drugs, and even so, he was still there dealing. Jian replies that even if he didn't sell, someone else would sell drugs to his brother, and that it was precisely because he was involved in this that he could protect his brother. The man also tells the gangster to stay strong and make sure not to show what he thinks or feels, because that's the only way to survive if you don't have power. Later, we see Dajian approaching someone and saying he brought the goods. Yun, the president of DS Security, comments that the guy did a good job and asks him to have a drink. The Scarface man thanks him, then grabs a shot of soju, and Yun simply watches as his subordinate drinks. The president says it's been 20 years that he's lived this criminal life, and in 20 years he hasn't seen anyone as skilled as Dajian. After drinking, Da thanks his boss for the compliment. Deok-soo continues his speech, saying that a man needs to swim in wider waters and then he wants to climb higher in life. But despite wanting that, things haven't been working out, since the man who is supposed to be his trusted right hand is busy handling some bastards in the neighborhood and neglecting other businesses. The man then questions he'll have to cut off his own right hand with his own 2 hands. As a warning, Yun tells Dajian that this is his last chance, and you should immediately get rid of the Bujin faction. Later, we see Dajian walking through the corridors of DS Security. In his mind, he says the pressure is on him now, and it's probably because of Kim Jae-hoon. Suddenly, a stranger starts walking toward him wearing a flashy red suit. Seeing this, Dajian instantly recognizes him. The man says it's been a long time since he last saw the kid, which irritates the gangster. The flashy man then asks how the scar on his face is doing. It's revealed that this is Kang Chang-seok, the former right hand of Yun Deok-soo, and the guy says he heard that stab wounds tend to ache on rainy days. Kim, hearing that, doesn't seem pleased with the guy's presence. We then see the day when Dajian got the knife wounds that left his scars. It's also revealed that it was Chang-seok who gave Dajian those scars. As he passes by his ex-rival, the man says he's been curious since then. He wanted to know if Dajian's expression would stay the same. After slicing his face with a knife before leaving, Chang says he'll find that out very soon. In his mind, Dajian thinks it feels like the knife cut all the way to the bottom of his jaw. At the junkyard, we see a meeting happening between the Bujin faction and our protagonist. Su-min tells him that the maximum number of people she can recruit is 10, and if he wants to bring in people from outside the area, it could go up to 20. She also explains that DS Security likely has 100 members, so they must avoid direct conflict. Changing the subject, Jin-tae asks the girl if Woojin is really willing to cooperate with them. Kara replies that Pai isn't someone who sticks to any group. He's always been like that. Wondering who is currently in command of DS Security, our protagonist guesses that it was probably Dajian running the place. Cha's subordinates get quite irritated upon hearing that name. The girl promptly replies that the boy was right. Our protagonist asks Su-min to tell him what kind of person Dajian was, and he questions whether it would be a problem if he handled the gangster alone. Upon hearing those words, she seems a bit pensive. Sometime later, we are taken to a tattoo studio. Inside, Dajian is sitting, staring at a cup in front of him. Lee Cheolmin says she thought Dad had come there to drink coffee, but he hadn't even touched the cup. Kindly, the woman asked Dajian to open up to her and tell her what was going on because she was willing to listen to everything. However, finally touching the cup in front of him, the boy replies that nothing had happened. Cheolmin goes on to say that his brother was always like that before stirring up some trouble, getting all serious and pressing his lips together. Then she asks if what's going on with Dajian is related to Sumin. Upon hearing that, the scar-faced guy doesn't know what to say. Clutching his thighs with one hand, he replies that it's nothing. As he stands up, the man says that everything will go back to how it was once he gets rid of one person. The tattoo artist, hearing that, seems a bit confused. Before leaving, the gangster thanks her for the coffee as he opens the door. Outside, he runs into all his subordinates and gives them the order to go to the junkyard. An army of criminals begins marching toward the location, armed to the teeth. Watching those people leave, Lee calls Jang Ho. Worried, the woman asks why Dajian was acting that way. Jang Ho comes clean, informing her that Kang Chang-seok had been released from prison. The woman doesn't recognize the name right away but becomes thoughtful, until she remembers that Chang was the crazy guy who massacred the Bujin faction 2 years ago. Back at the junkyard, we see some wrecked cars lying around. Amid all that junk, Dajian's personal army and the Bujin faction meet face to face. Dajian tells the criminals in front of him that they should have kept hiding like rats, just like they were doing before, and that way they wouldn't have to meet again. But furious, Wonil snaps back that he shouldn't be so cocky because he could fall off that pedestal at any moment. Cutting to the point, the scarred gangster asks where Sumin was. Jin-tae arrives at the scene, asking why Dajian was looking for the girl. Mocking his opponents, the blonde says that with the way they look, he's not surprised they're nothing more than gangsters. We see that standing next to him was his boss, Shin. The director of DS Security, upon seeing that his opponent Shin had come, takes on a menacing stance. He says that none of this would have happened if Kim had just left, but now it was too late. However, the boy replies that he never thought about leaving since he was going to take over that place. While taking off his coat, Dajian calls the boy crazy and asks if he even knows who he's burying his fangs at. He thinks to himself that he'll show Sumin what a terrible mistake she made by trusting Shin and declares he's going to rip out his fangs right now. Back at the bar, owned by Kang Min-seong's friend, we see Woo Jin drinking inside. The cook criticizes his friend's drink choice and asks if he's broke. As he pours another shot, Woo Jin tells him to stop the unnecessary nagging. Suddenly, a hand starts to open the door, and the cook immediately realizes who it is and is surprised. Sumin, after arriving at the place, walks up to her former colleague. Woo Jin, drowning in alcohol, asks the woman if she had something to say to him. However, the girl just asks him to get up because she wants him to come with her. But the young man refuses and tells her to go away. Tired of that conversation, Sumin tells him to stop running away. She says the two of them had been constantly closing their eyes, and in the blink of an eye, the place they lived in turned into a hell. That's why she asks Woo Jin to join her so they can put an end to this, because they need to resolve what happened between them and the problem with Dajian. At that moment, the director of DS Security begins walking towards Shin, telling his subordinates not to do anything until he gives the order. The two leaders stand face to face, preparing for a fight. Dae asks if Shin will be okay without a weapon, warning that if the boy gets closer, he'll die. However, Shin sarcastically replies that using a weapon would be too much against someone like him. The gangster, hearing those words and taking them as an insult, seems to hesitate for a moment before clenching his fist. He then tries to punch our protagonist in the face, but Shin dodges to the side. With a quick spin, the boy counterattacks, trying to land a hit on John. But the gangster is quite skilled and manages to minimize the blow by blocking it with his shoulder and striking Shin's shoulder in return. After that exchange, Kim seems a bit surprised. And before the boy can think too much about it, he's hit by a kick to the ribs from Dajian. Jin-tae looks a bit alarmed seeing his boss get hit, but confidently, he already knows how this fight will go. Dajian, with an extremely terrifying expression, declares that he's going to make his opponent pay for pissing him off. The blonde, on the other hand, thinks it's been a long time since his boss got punched by someone. At that moment, we witness an honest exchange of blows between our protagonist and his enemy. Once again, our protagonist ducks to dodge an attack. With ease, he also leans back to avoid a clean punch to the ribs. Already frustrated, Dajian prepares to throw an uppercut at Shin, who once again manages to step back. Seeing his attacks constantly dodged, the man starts to get a bit irritated. Jin-tae, who is beside Wonil, asks him how strong Dajian is and if compared to Woo Jin, who would win. Wonil replies that he doesn't know since the two never met or fought. But what he is sure of is that people who saw Woo Jin fight thought they were watching a fighting machine, and that's why Dia recognizes the boy's skills. On the other hand, Dajian didn't have a flashy start in the underworld, but even so, he remained the only one standing among all the renowned fighters, because he went through a lot over the years and Wonil couldn't even imagine how strong Dajian must have become. Even after hearing that, Jin-tae still looks confident. At that moment, Dajian tries to land a kick on Kim, and the boy manages to sidestep. However, with extreme skill, the gangster spins and attempts to kick Jin with his heel, and the boy barely manages to block, still feeling part of the impact. Wonil comments that Kim's body was already taking a lot of punishment from those blows, and that wasn't even all. He states that Dajun's subordinates didn't have a single doubt their master would win. It was absolute confidence on their part. Still, Jin-tae asks why Wonil was afraid, since everyone thinks that way until they see their leader getting beat up by Shin. Trying to dodge another of his opponent's attacks, our protagonist crouches down. However, that's exactly what Dajun wanted, claiming that he caught Shin. Right after, the gangster tries to hit him with a kick, making the boy crouch even lower. And in the end, it was all part of Dajun's plan, who spins and tries to strike our protag with his heel. The boy appears to be hit, dropping to his knees on the ground, but he shows that he knew exactly what was going to happen, grabbing Dajun's leg. After that, he manages to throw the gangster off balance, sending him to the ground. All of Dajun's soldiers, and even the members of the Bujin faction, are impressed by that. After knocking his enemy down, Kim says that when he used his feet, he left his guard open, so he needed to learn more. While recovering, Dajun calls the kid arrogant. He tries to sweep our protagonist's legs and then quickly gets up. Kim ends up cornered near a car, and seeing this opportunity, Dajun tries to kick him but misses. This gives Shin an opening, and he grabs the gangster by the collar. Then he manages to execute a judo throw, slamming his enemy to the ground. With the impact to his back, the man with the facial scar ends up weakened. Kim tries to take advantage of the moment to kick his opponent, but Dajun, being clever, manages to roll to the side. He quickly uses that momentum to stand up again, though not fully upright. Our protagonist isn't messing around, kicking toward Dajun's face, who brings his arms up just in time to avoid the hit. With that blow, the director of DS Security managed to stay on his feet a bit longer, which was exactly what Kim wanted, and so the former assassin landed a knee strike to his opponent's stomach. Not giving Da a moment to breathe, Shin followed up with a punch to the man's stomach. He also stomped on his opponent's foot, finishing his combo with a punch to the gangster's face. After that flurry of attacks, Seong's brother collapsed to the ground, badly injured. The man began groaning in pain after so many hits from Kim. Jin-tae figured the gangster wouldn't be getting back up, having just taken a brutal beating. However, he couldn't understand what was going on with Dajun's subordinates. Apparently, they wouldn't lift a finger even after their boss got pummeled. Woojin, watching the fight nearby, lit a cigarette. Jin-tae's expression changed immediately, surprised by something. Pai added that this was only the beginning. We then see that even after all those blows, Dajun wasn't going to give up and was getting back on his feet. Kim just stared at the gangster with a bloodthirsty look. And in his head, Woojin added that son of a bitch Dajun only got serious when he was turned into a pool of blood. Immediately, with the momentum from getting up, Dajun landed a solid uppercut on Kim, making the young man feel a real hit for the first time. Our protagonist took a few steps back after the powerful strike. Dajun stated that his head was finally clear, since he'd been overthinking while fighting someone like Kim. When in truth, he should have just killed Shin first and thought later. Amber Tiger remained silent for a moment. Spitting blood, he said that Dajun was full of shit, and once again the two charged into the fight. Elsewhere, Chang Seok looked at his watch, thinking that the result should come any moment now, whether Dajun would betray them or destroy the Bujin faction. Still, he said that no matter how this ended, President Yun had promised him Kim Dajun's head, and the traitor, betraying his right-hand man, said that Chang Seok could do whatever he wanted. At that moment, Kim decided to use his jujitsu, and after dodging a strike, he crouched to his enemy's waist level. The boy started moving to his opponent's back, aiming to control him. He climbed the gangster's waist, managing to get to his neck and applying a rear naked choke. Starting to feel his breathing cut off, but unwilling to quit, Dajun countered the choke with a judo throw. He hurled Kim forward with a takedown. Even so, our protagonist barely managed to stay on his feet. Determined not to give him time to recover, Dajun punched the boy in the face. Woo Jin, watching the fight, remarked that his friend was different from before. He was becoming more of a professional. And in his mind, he wondered what Amber Tiger planned to do, since he was sure Shin had no choice but to use whatever card he still had left. Stu-min stepped in front of Jin-tae, beginning to walk toward the fight. The blonde man asked what she was planning to do, and she shot back that Dajun was dominating Shin and things would get messy if he lost. However, Jin-tae retorted that she didn't know them, also saying that Guy wouldn't lose in a place like that. He also asked the girl to just wait and watch the fight, because it was about to end. Back in the fight, all Shin was doing at that moment was dodging. Dajun then launched a spinning elbow at our protagonist, who barely managed to block it. The DS security director questioned why Kim had crawled into Hoeim with such low-level skills. Our protagonist backed off after that hit. The boy twisted his wrist slightly while thinking. Adjusting his hair, Shin said he couldn't just let things go like that. Dajun declared he was sure of his victory, while walking toward Amber Tiger, said it was too late for him to back out now. The man ready to punch, telling Kim to die. But the assassin wasn't playing around. He shoved his opponent's punch away with his shoulder. Then with his hands, he completely redirected Dajun's strike. The gangster, having his attack redirected, started losing balance and stumbled forward. Shin took the opportunity to land a clean punch to the guy's face. After that, he grabbed his enemy by the collar, pulling him in and landing a knee to his stomach. At that point, the man with the skirted face was nearly defeated. but Amber Tiger wasn't satisfied yet, landing another punch to his chin. Dae-jeon starts to fall backward, nearly passing out after so many blows. Furious, Shin states that his opponent was going to walk away with quite a few massive bruises that day. As he falls, the director of DS Secret thinks his jaw was hit, and he's blacking out. On top of that, that bastard was hiding his true abilities, but he couldn't allow that, so the man tries to pull himself together. Thinking he still had a chance, he manages to regain his balance. But it's already too late, and when he looks forward, he sees an elbow coming straight for his face. After seeing their boss get knocked out, Dae-jeon's gangsters are shocked, and even the members of the Boojin faction can't believe what they're seeing. Woojin also can't believe what's happening in front of his eyes. We then see Dae-jeon completely laid out and defeated, with Shin standing in front of him. Jang Ho immediately gets angry and orders his soldiers to advance and finish off those bastards. However, a knife with the blade turned backward flies past him in the blink of an eye. The handle hits one of the gangsters, knocking him to the ground. Jin-tae says that this wasn't a surprise, as gangsters like that always want to fight dirty. And as he says that, he points a blade at Dae-jeon to keep the criminals from doing anything else. In his semi-conscious daze, the head of DS Security admits he can't move and thinks his vision is starting to blur. Looking at Shin, he says that Bastard could have ended this from the beginning, but hid his skills like he wanted to test him. And just before passing out, the poor guy sees Woojin in front of him. Completely furious, he asks himself why he always seems so pathetic in front of his friend. Sometime later, we shift to Sumin's junkyard house. With his wounds bandaged, Dae-jeon wakes up completely confused. He asks himself what the hell is going on. Looking to the side, he sees Jin calmly sitting and reading a book. Furious, Dae-jeon demands to know what Shin wants with him. Amber Tiger apologizes for being so cruel to Dae-jeon, also saying he had no choice. The director of DS Security responds that if he's thinking about making a deal with Yeon Deok-soo and using him as a bargaining chip, he should forget it, because he won't be of any use. However, our protagonist doesn't even seem to care, instead talking about something that had become a tradition in the underworld these days. The young man calmly states that Dae-jeon can leave if he wants to, since he doesn't plan on keeping him there. As he gets up, the gangster asks why Jin is letting him go and what he's planning. Before leaving, Dee says that if Jin is underestimating him, he's making a mistake. On the contrary, the boy says that Dao won't be fine with his body in that state, since Yeon won't be kind to the hunting dog who failed to catch his prey. While putting on his clothes, Dae-jeon tells him to worry about himself. Shin then asks what his former enemy plans to do after leaving. The former director of DS Security stops for a moment and seems thoughtful. Kim says it's too late and Dae-seon can't do anything now, since Yeon Deok-soo will be searching for him all over the city. Then, with all this cunning, Amber Tiger asks if Dae wouldn't consider taking down Yeon Deok-soo with him. Hearing that proposal, the man looks extremely contemplative. Elsewhere, we see Seong-jun walking the streets of Holim. The young man talks to someone, saying he thought that person would stay in prison for at least another 10 years, but they got out real fast. Chang Seok, who is behind him, says that Seong is as arrogant as ever and asks where his brother is. However, the guy says that even he doesn't know, and even if he did, he wouldn't tell a bastard like him. With a psycho-looking smile, the assassin says that Seong is going to meet his brother real soon. At that moment, someone shows up calling Seong trash and strikes one of the guy's underlings from behind. We see that it was Woojin who just knocked out Chang Seok's subordinate. In a commanding tone, he asks who the hell Chang thinks he is. Back at the junkyard, our protagonist tells Dae-jeon that if he was worried about his family, he didn't have to be, because he had already made sure Seong was safe. The gangster then asks why the kid came to that city. He also says that this world is more than it appears and asks if Shin has realized that there are unbelievable big shots behind it all. Kim replies that that's exactly why he chose that place, because of the big shots. Moreover, he was aware that the one now backing Yeon Deok-soo was Kim Jae-hoon, and because of that, his own tragedy would begin with him. While holding the flask of fika in his hand, Shin asked if Dae-jeon knew the man who was supplying that drug. Amber Tiger explained that the one selling it was the guy who controlled Deok-soo and Jae-hoon, the most wicked assassin in existence, codenamed Python Bak Do-chan. Shin also revealed that Bak Do-chan had killed his father and his master, Kang Min-seong, and now he was the center of power inside Castle. Hearing all that, Dae-jeon became completely furious. The boy went on, explaining that he had fallen into despair when he went up against them in the past, tasting the bitter flavor of defeat and abandonment while they moved forward. Not only that, but they had firmly established their own cartel in Northeast Asia. And even if he wanted to take out multiple leaders of Castle, it wasn't impossible. But there was no way a single individual could completely destroy the system and its army. In short, a single wasp couldn't take down an elephant alone, which meant that to bring down the entire organization, he had to find people who thought like he did. People who had lost everything to Castle, and he needed the strength of those people. Finally, the protagonist stated that he needed Dae-jeon's strength. At that moment, the gangster remembered a day when he was eavesdropping on a conversation between Jae-hoon and Yeon Deok-soo. Jae-hoon said that Kang Min-seong was dead, and now that Cha Il-guk was gone too, the city was ripe for the taking. Hearing all that, Dae-jeon wondered if he should tell Woojin, but decided against it, knowing his friend would do something reckless if he found out his master had been murdered. While recalling the leader of DS Security, Jae-hoon, and the drug dealer, Dao-jian declared that those kinds of people couldn't even be defeated. It would be better to become their dog, and that way, everyone would survive. Back to the present moment, our protagonist stated that the gangster should have a little faith in himself. Shin said that if he ignored this now, hell would only repeat itself again, and he needed to face the situation head-on. The criminal thought the guy was thinking on a much larger scale, and there was no doubt. In his eyes, there wasn't just desire, but absolute conviction in his beliefs. Dao-jian also compared Shin to an old acquaintance, but noted that there was something different between them. Besides, he thought it was absurd, but if there was someone who could take down Castle, that person would be Kim Shin. In his head, the man wondered if he could really do something like that, since he didn't want to put his friends in danger again. At that moment, Sumin opened the door to the place, surprising Da. Seeing the girl, the man was caught off guard. Chi, furious, started hitting him. After knocking her friend down, Sumin stood silent. Furious, the girl called him a foolish idiot and asked if Jian really thought they'd be happy watching him carry all the burden alone. Upon hearing that, Dao-jian immediately realized that she knew he had served DS secret only to protect them. Sumin said that when Dao-jian approached Yun Deok-su, she felt insignificant because there was nothing she could do. And when she saw her best friend in the group of her greatest enemy, she hated him for it, and that's why she never reached out. But nothing infuriated her more than seeing Dao-jian doubting himself. With tears in her eyes, she begged him to live for himself and not for protecting everyone, because she was the one who wanted to protect him. Sumin kept breaking down in tears, and Jang Ho, one of Da's subordinates, arrived at the place. The man said he had been waiting a long time for his master, saying that whatever decision he made, all of his subordinates would follow him. Seeing all that, Dao-jian thought that all of his companions were strong and could protect themselves, and he was the weak one all this time. As he got up, the gangster asked if all those people were crazy and if they had any idea what kind of people they'd be going up against. Hugging Sumin, he told his subordinates to get ready because from now on, they weren't going to be fighting local thugs anymore. Dao-jian called out to Kim Shin and said that 4 years ago, he died once. And this life that had once been lost, now renewed, he would entrust to our protagonist one last time. Back to Woojin. After defeating Chang Seok's henchman, the thug charged at him. The assassin tried to strike Pai, who dodged with ease. And with 2 knives in hand, Chang Seok lunged again, saying his skills were far from rusty. For a while, Chang keeps chasing Pai, trying to land a hit on him. After dodging to the side, Woojin ends up crashing into the wall, getting cornered, and Chang Seok laughs, realizing he's about to land a blow. At that moment, the assassin strikes his opponent with a knife, aiming to end the fight. Blood drips from Woojin, splattering onto the ground. Pai, after grabbing that Lumidix knife with his bare hands, tells him not to laugh before the fight is over. Then the boy lands a solid punch to the maniac's face. After getting hit, Chang Seok wonders how that crazy bastard could grab a knife with bare hands. In his head, he also thinks he was sure Woojin and Kim Dao-jian were no longer friends and something was definitely off. Still holding the other knife, Chang points the weapon at Woojin, saying it was just a bad day for him. He then says he can't finish things now and will leave it for later. Without hesitation, Chang Seok starts running like a madman. Woojin thinks about chasing him, but Seong asks him to stop. Dao-jian's brother comments that they should get out of there since Chang will come back with more thugs. Though still furious, Woojin agrees, letting go of his ally's hand and asking to leave. Back at DS Security, Yun is calling his thugs a bunch of useless bastards. Furious, the president asks why, even with so many men, they can't find a single guy. Then he demands to know whom the bastard was that messed up their sales operation. One of Yun's subordinates reports that he had never seen that person before, and in the middle of the chaos, they lost contact with Kim, and we see that Jin Tao was responsible for that. Even angrier, Yun demands to know what kind of idiot dares to mess with his business. Chang Seok, next to the president, states that Dao-jian betrayed them, Woojin was stirring up trouble, and some unknown bastard ambushed them. And apparently something was going on, so he asks Yun if he really thinks everything is going to be fine. The president of DS Security doesn't even know how to respond. Elsewhere, we see Shin explaining to Dao-jian that Woojin went to his brother, and that he also sent the Woojin faction members to protect the tattoo artist Lee. The gangster, on the other hand, replies that it won't be easy to provide a safe house for his guys. But Shin tells him not to worry because he asked a trustworthy guy to create a distraction and provide cover. After hearing all that, Dao-jian thanks him. However, he then says there's something Shin needs to know since he recognizes that the boy is strong. But there's a big problem with what he's getting involved in, because Yun Deok-su is the real problem. And then we cut back to the president. Furious, the man says he doesn't need any of his subordinates and that he'll handle it himself. Later, we see Seong and Woojin sitting near an alley. Woojin scolds Seong for everything he caused Dao-jian while getting ready to smoke. Seong retorts that Dao-jian is a dumb brat because he always thought about others instead of himself, and he's been like that since he joined the Woojin faction. Pai gets up and angrily says he doesn't want to keep babbling about the past again, so he's leaving. However, before he goes, Seong tells Pai that he's leaving the city soon, and once he's gone, his brother will finally have some peace, and he wants to leave to get clean from drugs. That's why the young man says he wants to ask P for one last favor. With a serious expression, Seong asks Woo Jin to please look after his brother, since Daejeon is someone who cares too much about the people close to him, and he went to work with Yun Deok-soo to protect everyone. That's why he says he doesn't think he can help his brother, but maybe Woo Jin can. But right then, a punch hits his face. We see that it was Woo Jin, and Seong, even caught by surprise, manages to dodge the full hit. Furious, he asks if Woo Jin has gone crazy. But the guy responds that Jun is talking like he's about to die or something, but it looks like he's still alive and kicking. Turning away, Pai says he doesn't care whether the guy is leaving the city or getting clean from drugs. But either way, if he has even a shred of courage, he should protect what's important to him with his own hands. We then return to DS Security Headquarters, where Yun is left speechless. In his mind, the president thought that Daejeon and Woo Jin were two people who stood out from the rest. And because of that, he controlled Daejeon by keeping his brother Seong-jun addicted to drugs and separating Woo Jin from everyone else. After doing all of that, he thought he could pave the way in a castle by pulling those strings, but nothing went as expected. So now it was time to make a decision once and for all, and at that moment, he asked his subordinate if he still hadn't finished. Man-jae, recovering from the beating he took from Yun, apologized and explained that they had been sweeping the entire city, but still hadn't located Da. Chang, on the other hand, reported that they didn't need to waste any more time. They should just take some citizens hostage and set the junkyard on fire to make them show up. And in addition, the young man said that the people he brought were specialists in that kind of thing and very reliable. Yun, however, didn't agree and told them to wait for now. At that moment, a long-haired man entered the room summoned by the president. Hyef-ju informed the president that they had found director Daejeon. However, he was heading their way along with a bunch of nobodies from the Bujin faction. Upon hearing that, Deok-soo snapped his cigarette in half. Then we see a good number of people walking toward DS Security, with our protagonist among them. Staring at Shin, who was in front, Daejeon appeared thoughtful. In a flashback, he recalled telling Shin that they couldn't handle Yu Deok-soo with their current numbers. Even with that warning, Shin retorted that as soon as the sun rose, they would go straight to DS Security. Amber Tiger said that Yu Deok-soo was just the first step in their journey, and the young man explained that the other factions were lying dormant because of Castle's authority. But they needed those factions' strength, which is why they would publicly execute DS Security to get the others' attention. Back in the present moment, Daejeon thought that guy was reckless to the point of being irrational. But when he was with him, he didn't feel like he would lose. At that moment, Yu Deok-soo was leading his faction, approaching Shin's group while scaring a few civilians. The two crowds of criminals faced off, separated only by a car lane. Yun told Daejeon that he thought the boy was smarter than that, joining up with those miserable nobodies to go against him, just to feel like a leader. However, no longer wanting to stay quiet, Daejeon stepped forward and called out to President Yu Deok-soo. But, enraged, he rephrased his words and cursed the man, calling him disgusting. He stated that the president had been leeching off the people of that city until now. He also said that Yun had threatened his companions, treating them like dogs. And because of that, today he would make Yun pay for everything he had done. The only thing he regretted until now was that in that game, he wasn't the one in charge. And after saying that, the man looked at Shin. Our protagonist stepped forward and said that that must be Yun Deok-soo. Seeing that person, the DS Security president looked completely confused, asking who the hell he was. Ignoring his enemy, Shin said he didn't need to say anything because their goal was pretty obvious, and for that reason, the young man declared that he would begin. Feeling threatened, Yun questioned how those bastards had the nerve. He also wondered why that guy was leading that faction, but exhausted, the young man said that either way it didn't matter. He finally gave the order for his subordinates to attack those bastards. Then the two factions charged at each other. Hyek-ju from the East faction and Woo-il from the Bujin faction locked eyes for a moment. Before Hyek-ju could do anything, a foot landed on his face, knocking him down instantly. After taking that hit, Hyek-ju asked who the hell had done that. Looking forward, he saw that it was Seong-jun, Daejeon's brother. In an imposing manner, the heavily tattooed young man declared that he was there to pay back what had been done to his brother. Man-jae, standing beside Yun, asked Seong-jun how he dared to say such a thing. While fighting, Daejeon saw his brother and asked what the hell he thought he could do in that condition. But at that moment, he noticed a blade coming toward him. Looking forward, he saw that the one wielding it was his enemy, Chang Seok, and he barely managed to dodge the stab. Realizing he missed, Chang Seok said it was a shame. He really wanted to hear some screams from his enemy. But Dae snapped back that he'd make sure the screams came out of Chang's mouth. A fierce fight between the two factions was happening at that moment. Suddenly, one of the DS security members looks to the side and notices something coming his way. Out of nowhere, he gets run over by a motorcycle and is thrown several meters away. The person on the bike doesn't stop and heads straight toward Chang Seok to help Daejeon. The guy, seeing the vehicle coming his way, wonders what the hell is going on. And before he can even react, he's run over and thrown several meters away. Taking off his helmet, the stranger tells Shin not to get the wrong idea. Revealing himself to be Woo Jin, the guy says he just came by to take out the trash. Daejeon, seeing his comrade there, gives a small, surprised smile. Then the two old friends start fighting together, beating down most of the rival faction members. Shin, who had been standing still until then, calls out to his right-hand man, Jin-ta. The guy tells his companion there were too many DS security members around. Then he asks Jin to cut them in half. The blonde, after receiving the order from his master, gets ready, saying it was time to scare the little kids. Armed with two knives, Jin-tae begins walking toward his enemies. Effortlessly, he uses the handle of one of the knives to knock one of them out by striking the back of his neck. Then he lands a clean hit on another member's throat, taking him down as well. Three more guys charge at the blonde, trying to finish him off. Even faced with that, Jin just smiles. In the blink of an eye, the guy rushes at the three and takes them out almost instantly. Not satisfied, two more criminals charge at Jin-tae, furious after seeing their partners defeated. With ease, the boy disarms one of his enemies. While dodging the strike from the other, he knocks out the one already unarmed. He continues fighting multiple people at once. In the end, the guy slams one of his opponent's faces into the ground. After immobilizing and knocking out a huge number of people, he remains standing without a scratch. Curious, he wonders how those guys could be so careless and whether they were just there to get in his way. The other DS security gangsters are visibly intimidated, questioning who the hell that person was. Manhwa, who had already recovered after getting beaten by his boss, asks his subordinate to step aside. Jin-tae realizes it's the chubby guy from the other day and says he remembers him smashing his head and getting tangled in some papers. The fat guy gets furious at the insult, saying Jin-tae should start praying or he was going to regret it. However, before the chubby guy can even react, the blonde lunges at him, slashing his stomach with his knife. After that, Shin's right-hand man turns around and lands a kick, knocking Manhwa to the ground for good. The gangster, after those two hits, falls without even being able to respond. Angry, the blonde says they'll play next time, he's a bit busy right now. Then the boy keeps walking forward, attacking another one of his enemies. Seeing that Woojin thinks that Bastard is hitting vital points and minimizing bloodshed, and he wonders who Jin-tae and Shin really are. Chang Seok recovers from being run over and tells Woojin not to look around in the middle of a fight. He says their last encounter was way too short and then starts mocking Woojin, trying to get under his skin. But before Pai can do anything, Da Jian asks his friend to leave that guy to him. Though hesitant, Pai turns and just stares at his friend without saying a word. Chang Seok, on the other hand, seems furious and says he's going to send both of them to the afterlife. Woojin hands one of his gloves to Da Jian, asking him to finish it quickly since they're outnumbered. In his head, Pai thinks that if his friend is taking care of Chang, then his target is Yun Deok-soo. He also says he's not going to let Shin deal with that guy with his own hands. One of Chang Seok's subordinates starts walking toward Pai, recognizing him. The guy says Woojin is famous because years ago he took down 30 members of the Orient faction in a single fight, even being called the God of Fighting. That's why he says he's going to find out whether that God of Fighting nickname really fits him or not. But in the blink of an eye, Woojin ducks in front of his enemy. Without the gangster even realizing, he's struck square in the chin with a punch. That cocky thud is defeated. Then Woojin warns the man behind him that he was in his way, and the man becomes completely intimidated. We then return to the intense fight between Chang and Da Jian. While trying to land knife strikes on his opponent, Chang begins to say that Da Jian used to act superior, but in the end, he was nothing. Once again, the guy prepares to attack his enemy. However, Da Jian was alert and easily grabs Chang by the collar, landing a blow to his chest at the same time. After that, the guy gets ready to punch his opponent, who for some reason starts laughing. Realizing he had fallen into a trap, Da Jian becomes irritated, and at that moment, Chang slashes Da Jian with a knife. After cutting his rival's chest, the guy says he never understood him at all, since he could have had everything he wanted if he had just obeyed. We can also see that several people were just watching that massive fight. Pointing to those people, Seok comments that they all know they can't disobey the bosses, so he wants to know why Da Jian did it. Once again, he goes in to stab the guy. But this time, Dae manages to hit Chang's wrist, disarming him. With that strike, the guy loses one of his weapons, which flies several meters away. Then he gets punched square in the face. That blow is strong enough to make him bleed a lot. Jivan, on the other hand, says that Seok could have kept on living like a dog, just obeying orders if he wanted. But that day, he was going to take down Yun Deok-soo. Trying to recover from the blow, Chang attempts to stab him with a knife. Gripping the blade with both hands, he says he's going to show Da Jian what happens when an insect tries to rebel. And again, the guy tries to stab Da Jian, who dodges with ease. Seeing that his attacks weren't working, Chang resorts to brutality, kicking the man in front of him. Da, however, manages to block but still takes some damage from the hit. With a smile, the gangster says he hopes Da hasn't forgotten that Yun Deok-soo is a much crueler monster than he is. And that day, Da Jian is going to taste a bit more of true fear. One of the Bujin faction members begins praying to God as he sees a monster before him. Facing Yun Deok-soo, the guy says he didn't know he was that huge. He starts hesitating, thinking he should run away, but before he can even react, Yun grabs him by the hair. With ease, the Colossus slams him onto the ground, burying the back of his head into the floor. After defeating that man, he begins taking off his suit, saying that there isn't a single bastard worth anything there. Looking around, the guy sees his soldiers being defeated and realizes things are getting worse. He also sees that it's all because of that blonde guy, since that man alone took down over 20 men. And so he decides that he's going to slice that person first, until suddenly, he feels a strange energy. Beside him, one of his loyal fighters is sent flying. Looking in that direction, he sees Shin staring at him. Our protagonist, standing imposingly, tells Yun that this is the end. Even furious, Deok-su realizes that Shin is the leader of those people. After defeating Kukju, Jin-tae realizes those guys didn't have a single decent fighter, and it was getting boring. Even on the ground, Man-jae starts laughing and saying that the blonde guy was finished. With conviction, he says their president will take care of them, and no matter how hard they tried, it won't be enough to stop them. Because unlike Woo Jin and Da Jian, who never left that city, their president is feared across the entire country. However, Jin-tae laughs back and tells him to know his place. Because contrary to what Man-jae thought, Woo Jin, Da Jian, and everyone else from that city were the same, and in truth, Hoim wasn't special. Also, that talk was a joke, so he tells Man-jae to take a good look now because a worm like him won't see this anywhere else. Because that was what it meant to be world-class or feared by many countries, and at that moment, Yun charges at Shin. Sumin, seeing something, starts wondering what was going on. In her mind, she thinks that for the past 2 years, even after trying, they hadn't been able to do anything to their arch-enemy, Deok-su. But our protagonist had defeated him almost effortlessly. Right before that happened, Yun, Deok-su, and Shin were facing off. Woo Jin, who was busy dealing with some enemies, thought that Guy had arrived before him. The young man told himself that Yun reached the top because he got Jae-hoon's support, like he earned the title of national fighter with his own fists and strength. Furthermore, Kim hadn't even shown his full strength yet, but he couldn't afford to go easy on Yun, since the guy was incredibly powerful. At that moment, Deok-su asked if Shin was the worm that had been bothering him these days, but our protagonist simply assumed his fighting stance with a serious expression. Like a furious beast, Yun Deok-su charged at Shin, declaring that an unknown rookie like him shouldn't dare to bother him. However, even with that overwhelming speed, Shin managed to sidestep and easily dodge his enemy's blow. With the same ease, he counterattacked, landing a punch straight into the rib of the Colossus before him, leaving him confused about what had just happened. Deok-su felt the strike and quickly turned to try grabbing and crushing Shin's skull. Amber Tiger stayed confident, dodged again, and counterattacked with another punch to his opponent, who still couldn't react. With just those 2 hits and the look on Yun Deok-su's face, it was already clear where the fight was headed. Desperately, Yun threw an uppercut at our protagonist, who managed to defend himself. While blocking, Shin retaliated by striking Yun's chest with his foot. However, the blow Kim received was strong enough to send him flying a few meters, as Yun was indeed powerful. Even so, Shin wasn't shaken. He regained his stance and charged toward his opponent. Like a hunter locking onto his prey, Kim kept his eyes fixed on his target. Seeing him advance, Deok-su thought his movements were like those of a wild animal, and that guy wasn't just anyone. And if he wasn't careful, he would end up becoming prey to Amber Tiger, so he started to prepare a punch. But before he could even register it, Deok-su felt an impact on his body. We then see that at high speed, our protagonist had landed a clean hit on Yun's neck. Deok-su began to collapse, badly injured, and without giving his prey a chance to strike back, Amber Tiger landed another punch on Deok-su's ribs. That hit was strong enough to crack the man's bones. Before the president of DS Secret could fall defeated, our protagonist grabbed him by the collar. Without mercy, he kicked his opponent, who could no longer even react. After taking all those hits, the only thing we could see was blood spraying from the severely injured and nearly unconscious Deok-su. The man admitted that something was wrong. Looking ahead, he felt a crushing pressure coming from the assassin and realized that this was not someone he could handle. After delivering several strikes to his opponent, our protagonist punched Yun's face toward the ground, knocking him down completely. The once dangerous president of DS Secret couldn't do a thing in front of Amber Tiger. We then see Jin-tae looking at his master and calling him Amber Tiger, which meant Tiger of the Black Dragon River. The blonde man said that usually he's calm, composed, and dignified. But when he chooses his prey and begins to move, he turns into a fierce and ruthless predator. Thus, we see Shin finishing off Deok-su. Everyone around who had been fighting stopped for a moment and turned to see what was happening. Even Shin's allies couldn't believe what they were seeing right before them. Man-jae and Sumin were also extremely surprised by it all. We then see that in just a few blows, Deok-su had been defeated by Shin, who remained standing without a single injury. And looking at him, everyone around stared as if they were watching a tiger devour its prey. During his own fight, Chang Seok claimed that this couldn't be happening. He dropped his weapon and was then kicked in the face as he wondered how he could have lost to someone like Da Jian. After finishing his opponent, the gangster thought that Shin had taken down Yun Deok-su in an instant, and that guy really seemed like a man without limits, completely different from when he had fought him before. Da Jian also realized that Kim had been hiding his true strength from the beginning, and maybe it was all a plan to make Deok-su reveal an opening. On top of that, he attracted everyone's attention to the fight and displayed his overwhelming power, ensuring that DS Secret wouldn't be able to recover. The DS soldiers began to panic and gave up the fight, realizing that their president had been defeated, and there was nothing more they could do. Still on the ground, Yun calls Shin a bastard. In his mind, the man thinks Kim has an abnormal ability and bloodlust, and though he's faced many opponents, Kim was on another level. Yun also states that Kim was extremely similar to those guys, referring to the ones from Castle. Standing before his defeated opponent, our protagonist remains silent for a moment. He asks Yun to admit his defeat and give up, since that war was something he could never handle and was beyond his reach. Even going against everything he believed in, the gangster doesn't react, he only clenches his fist in anger. Yun starts to realize he wasn't strong enough to face those people, and that this was as far as he could go. And so the battle finally ends with our protagonist's faction victorious, defeating DS Security. Sumin states that it ended way too fast, making it feel like everything they did in the past 2 years had been for nothing. Jang Ho replies that he saw it with his own eyes but still couldn't believe how someone could move that fast, surprised by Shin. Sumin says she's curious to know what kind of people Shin and Jin Tae are. The girl also says our protagonist is very different from how she remembered him in the past, and we see that Woo Jin is the one who isn't happy about it. In shock from what he just witnessed, the man says Shin is just like Kang Min Seong. The young man recalls when he was struck by our protagonist and how Kim had claimed he owed one to Kang Min Seong. However, Woo Jin says that was a lie since that bastard inherited everything from his master Kang. Furious, he questioned why Kang let that guy inherit everything instead of him. Once again, he wonders why as he stares at our protagonist. The narrator explains that the collapse of the seemingly invincible group and the rise of a new power filled the city of Homeim with a sense of tension and curiosity. All the citizens were shocked by the scene they had witnessed. However, an unknown power from outside began to rise, and at that moment we see someone on the phone informing their boss that Yun Deok-soo was done for. The guy also tells his brother that, just as he predicted, Dad Jiun had betrayed Yun, though those people there weren't anyone they had seen before. The narrator continues saying that an unextinguished ember could plant the seeds of discord for the future, and we see Chan completely furious over his defeat. Moreover, the greatest threat and future adversary of Kim was still pressing forward, and in Russia, someone arrives at Barskra. Lisa, seeing the person enter her establishment, is completely frightened. It's revealed that the person who entered was Pitten, asking the woman if they were open. The narrator doesn't stop and finally states that in the midst of the calamity before the storm, Kim Shin and his group became the new rulers of the city of Hoeim. And so we see our protagonist's new faction gathered at the former headquarters of DS Secret. Da Jun places an object on the table and explains that it's a USB drive Yun always used. The guy also says the USB contains a lot of information on the leaders of other factions, and especially on deals made with the Haeseong Construction Company. That's why it should be very useful to our protagonist while he's organizing the foundation, and upon seeing it, Jin Ta comments that it's an amazing item. The blonde guy mentions that this item would make things a lot easier, and Da Jin gets ready to say something else. Dae says that from now on he's going to treat Shin with the respect due to his position, because even though they may have taken down Yun, they still needed to merge with the Eastern faction, and for that reason, they had to make the chain of command clear within the organization. However, that was only his and his subordinates' will, so he humbly asks our protagonist to accept it. Shin agrees and responds that even so, Dae could be as casual as he wanted at any time, since it wouldn't affect the faction's hierarchy. Jin Ta laughs and says his master is a really cool guy, then asks if that means they've taken over the city of Hoeim. Sumin, on the other hand, seems quite pensive, stating that one person has been on her mind. She explains that after Yun took the North District, he spent 2 years trying to drive that person out of the city, but failed miserably. That person was Yi Sul from the South District, and Da Jian seems to recognize him. Jin Tai and Shin remain silent for a moment. On a bus, we see a few muscular men dressed in black helping an elderly lady. Even while helping the elderly woman, due to their size, the men unintentionally seem to intimidate some people. Subin explains that there's only one rule in Hoeim's southern district, and it's that if you see bulky men dressed in black, just avoid them no matter what, because on the outside they may not look any different from unruly gangsters. But in reality, they are a vigilant group formed to protect the weak, and they are the young adult group representing the hope of the southern district. Then we see that Yi Sul is an extremely muscular man who had just received the news that our protagonist had taken down Yun Deok-soo. For some reason, the guy was wearing an apron. A woman beside him scolds Sul for cursing in front of children, and they start teasing him. His mother tells him to serve the kids quickly because they were hungry, and he apologizes as he does it. In his mind, he thinks that he knows Dad Jian couldn't remain loyal to someone like Yun Deok-soo. However, he wonders what made Dad Jian change his mind so quickly. He also questions whether the guy was truly confident in his decision. At night, we go to a building in Hoeim's southern area. Several muscular men wearing black shirts were guarding a staircase. Someone approaches the place, and one of the intimidating men notices that the person is Yun Deok-soo's puppet, or rather ex-puppet, and at that moment, we see that it was Dad Jian. The young man imposingly asks if Yi Sul is there. However, the muscular men try to correct him, saying he should refer to Yi Sul as president. Suddenly, someone tells his subordinates to let Dad Jian through. And Sue, the group's second in command, says that Dajeon isn't the type to play games, and if he's there, he must have a valid reason. Even with that, Seon's brother doesn't show any expression. He starts walking through the group of men, staring him down without showing a hint of fear. After some time, he finally reaches Yi Seul's presence. With a completely different demeanor compared to earlier that day, Seul now appeared very intimidating. The man comments that Dajeon was walking the path to change tigers like that, and he was braver than usual. Dajeon, on the other hand, remarks that it had been a while since he saw Yi, and he looked healthier. Still, the stern-faced man tells him to cut the small talk since Dajeon knew there were 20 people just staring at him, ready to take him down. But playfully, Insu corrects his boss, explaining that newbie wasn't there and wouldn't fight, so it was only 18 of them staring at Dajeon. Hearing that, the scar-faced man doesn't look even slightly intimidated, sits down on an armchair, and states that he's sure Seul already heard the news. So he would get straight to the point, suggesting to Seul that they join forces. Dajeon says that maybe they're enemies, but he knew Yi was an honorable man and respected him for protecting that neighborhood. Slamming his hand on the table, Dajeon states that they weren't playing any mind games and that Deoksu was just the beginning, because their plan was to bring down Jaehoon and eventually Castle. Upon hearing that, Insu is stunned and can't even reply. Seul replies that he always found it strange that Dajeon could work for that piece of trash Deoksu, but he never imagined the guy had such a big plan. He then gets ready to respond, but we skip the scene and see some flashing lights. It's then shown that Seul's faction had gone to our protagonist's faction headquarters for a meeting. Inside the room, we see Shin with Dajeon and Seul with his men. In his mind, Yi wonders if that was really the guy who took down Yun, since he imagined that whoever did it had to be someone of national level. Shin speaks and says he heard that Seul withstood the pressure from Haesun Construction and Yu until the end. That's why the young man reveals that they plan to take down Jaehoon and those above him, and beyond that, he wished to borrow Seul's and his group's strength. Hearing this, the muscular man seems quite confused. He calls out to Dajeon and asks if the guy hadn't passed on his answer correctly. That tells Kim that he thinks the kid is mistaken, and that he should clean out his ears and listen carefully. He then starts saying that he doesn't like outsiders like him because people like Jaehoon and Yu Deok turned that neighborhood into a pile of garbage. That's why he orders that from now on, Shin must respond to his questions properly, because he had gone there today to turn that place upside down. With an imposing tone, Seul asks why Kim was messing with those kinds of people, if he wanted to become famous in that world or perhaps join them in the future. However, our protagonist simply reveals that he held a grudge and would do anything to make those people pay. Yi mockingly responds that it was understandable. He assumes that Shin was recruiting people and messing with those dangerous guys just for his insignificant revenge. Then the strong guy asks him if that doesn't make him a bastard with no morals. In her thoughts, Sumin explains that the Hope Group exists to protect children and the weak, and that Seul is the kind of guy who becomes a beast when he sees injustice. In other words, he's not the type to be persuaded by money or work, so she wonders if Dajeon would be able to convince them anyway. In a flashback, we see Dajeon suggesting that Kim recruit the Hope Group, saying they were well organized and they would need their strength for their goal. Cha, confused, asked Dajeon how he would convince them without money, since the boys from the association held no grudge against Castle. Dajeon replies that he had something prepared, and if Seul and his group found out about it, they'd probably tremble. Seeing his subordinate's determination, Shin seems to believe in him. Back in the present moment, Amber Tiger asks Seul to calm his emotions, saying there's still time to judge after hearing their story. And noticing there's no agitation or provocation in Shin's tone, he concludes that he apparently wasn't just an ordinary thug. At that moment, Dajeon asks someone to come in. When he turns around, Seul sees something that shocks him. A poor boy is thrown to the ground, lying completely still, brutally beaten. The boy calls Seul brother and apologizes to him. At that moment, the members of the Hope Group rush in to attack our protagonist's faction. Seul doesn't stay still, stomping his foot on the table in front of Shin. With authority, he demands to know from those bastards what that meant and why one of his brothers was there. And Sue, also furious, demands that Shin explain it immediately or everyone there would die. Even in that situation, Dajeon remains silent without saying a single word. Shin then begins to explain that Seul's brother had joined Yun Deok-su's group 3 months ago. He also took some money from the Hope Group and gave it to DS Secret. Based on that, Yun Deok-su schemed with all the investors in contact with the Hope Group, and that's how Haesun Construction was funding him. The financial problems the Hope Group later encountered were all part of Yun Deok-su's plan to bring them down from the inside. Hearing this, the thugs who had attacked the Bujin faction ask if that was true. Seul asks his brother if he hadn't taken the money to take care of their mother. And seeing his lie fall apart, the boy apologizes to Seul. In his mind, Dajeon thinks that good deeds without a cost are like steel. And that's the identity of the society and the pride of the Hope Group. Because even a disruption from the outside is fated to disturb part of society. Kim begins to rise and imposes himself, saying that it wasn't a lie that he was recruiting people for his personal revenge. However, he wanted to give some advice to Seul, as someone who had already been through that. Our protagonist reveals that the people from Castle never tolerate those who oppose or speak against them, not even the innocent or the powerless society behind them, and that's how he lost his father and his benefactor. So the young man tells Sewell that his brother's betrayal is just the beginning of misfortune, and even if Yu disappears, Jae-hoon won't leave the big guy or his family alone. Putting all of his pride aside, Shin bows and humbly asks to borrow Sewell's strength. Members of our protagonist's faction, including Jinta, are surprised by this gesture, and even the Hope Group doesn't know how to react to such humility. Finally, Kim declares that he is the only one capable of bringing down Castle, and he is placing his honor on the line. With so much going through his head, Sewell doesn't say a single word. Sometime later, we see food stalls near a few tents. Inside, the big guy sits quietly with a plate of food in front of him, deep in thought. His partner Sue arrives at the location, saying he knew his master was there and asks if he can drink with him. The man doesn't respond and simply asks his subordinate what he thought about it. And Sue then reveals that if it's about their brother, everything he said was a lie, especially the part about their mother having a terminal illness. The long-haired man also questions why his master was acting that way and what the problem was. The man just replies that he's not an idiot and that he lives with that kind of determination all the time. He explains that he's sure many things are happening, and even though he's the group's leader, he wasn't aware of everything, like what happened with the traitor. Sewell also serves a cup of sake to his companion. Sue then states that what Shin said was very unexpected, since he never thought you would bow his head like that. Sewell replies that that guy wasn't very amusing. Even though they owed our protagonist a favor because of his brother's situation, he still bowed down. He also wonders how the guy dared to do something so embarrassing in front of him. And Sue gets straight to the point and asks his brother if he's going to join Kim. A silence fills the room. Sewell reflects that Che Il-guk and Kang Min-seong were the two people he admired most, and besides that, Woo Jin and Kim Da-jeon were undeniably real men. And Da-jeon would never do something wrong, and Kim Shin was, in fact, definitely interesting. So he concludes that he hasn't finished talking with our protagonist yet. It comments that Shin knew exactly what to do and how to attract people, and for him to bow like that, his goal must really be right. So he asks Sue to call them since they were going to meet again. We then cut directly to a construction site. Our protagonist and Da-jeon meet with Sewell and Sue. Sewell tells our protagonist that he agreed with what they discussed on the phone and the boys' proposal was okay. Shin replies, thanking him and saying that they'll be a great help to them. As he removes his glasses, Yi comments that he liked the kid's spirit. However, they're not the type to serve a boss without getting to know him. Seeing that as a challenge, Kim responds that he's sure his opponent will be satisfied. Walking toward our protagonist, Sewell says that it's been a while since he last fought. In his mind, the man comments that no matter how many strong guys he sees, his blood always boils, and he likes that because he wants to fight and feel alive. And at that moment, he tries to punch Shin. But in the blink of an eye, the man wakes up lying on the floor. Sewell, confused, asks if he lost and what happened. And Sue responds that his boss had clearly been defeated. And so, after hearing that, the two of them start laughing out loud. Sitting on the floor, Shin spits blood and says that Kim really was an unreal guy. After saying that, he says he liked the kid. And so the narrator concludes that the 19 members of the Hope Group joined Kim Shin's faction. In a luxurious building, Jae-hoon was in shock after hearing something. He asked his subordinate if he was really talking about that guy. Chang Seok, who had recovered from the beating he took from Da-jeon, confirms what he said. And then he comments that the one who did all of that was Kim Shin. Upon hearing that name, Jae-hoon realizes it's the same name as an old friend of his. On another day, while his boss is having lunch, one of Jae-hoon's subordinates informs him that the buyers from the United States have a scheduled date to visit Korea. The employee also explains that they will arrive next Tuesday afternoon and that there's a scheduled meeting in the capital at the Sky Hotel. While he continues talking some nonsense, suddenly a noodle gets thrown in his face. Furious after hurling the food at his underling, Jae-hoon asks if he's an idiot and if he wants to get fired. The head of the construction company says he hates tall buildings, and upon hearing that, the employee bows and immediately apologizes to his boss. Before leaving, Jae-hoon throws the rest of his food on the poor man's head. As he walks away, he tells the man to stop messing around at work, cursing and right after. Now sitting in his office in his armchair while drinking a glass of wine, the man thinks that all of this is annoying. Remembering a defeated Deok-soo, the man thinks that either way, he was an idiot. Jae-hoon glances a little at Chang Seok, who is kneeling. In his mind, the head of the construction company thinks he couldn't believe Chang Seok had betrayed his own master Yun after everything. But he also says that Chang Seok reminded him of how he used to be in the past. In a flashback, we see Jae-hoon being beaten up by our protagonist. Even when threatening Shin with the power of his family, the boy didn't seem intimidated at all. Ashamed of this past, Jae-hoon thinks the most ridiculous thing was that he actually wanted to know how Kim Shin survived all this time, since it had been reported that he was dead. Confused, the man says that on top of that, that bastard dared to return after everything that happened, but he thinks that might be a good thing. Because he'll make Shin realize the abyss between them once again, and with all the power he now has, he'll make those arrogant eyes fill with despair. And this time, he'll make sure the boy meets his father, and after thinking that, Jae-hoon makes a decision. so the spoiled guy asks his assistant to call Kim Shin. Then he approaches Chang Seok while starting to talk to our protagonist on the phone. Jae-hoon says it's been a while since he last saw Kim and congratulates him on becoming a gang leader. Our protagonist, on the other hand, asks why his enemy is calling him. The spoiled one responds that he thought Shin had been dead all this time and asks if the boy had checked the files he sent. Kim asks if Jae-hoon is referring to that pile of garbage, and if so, yes, he had seen it. Sarcastically, the spoiled one asks if Kim didn't like the gift, then adds that he should have gotten rid of Yun Deok-soo from the start. However, our protagonist wasn't in the mood for games and threatens him, saying that whether the data leaks or not depends on Jae-hoon. Cornered, the guy asks what Kim wants. Shin replies that he doesn't want to see Jae-hoon's men walking around his territory, and he also demands control over Hoim, just like Yun Deok-soo had. Changing his expression completely, Jae-hoon threatens him, asking if our protagonist had a death wish. However, coldly the boy replies that the negotiation depends on how the spoiled brat decides to act. Jae-hoon decides to accept, saying he'll do it for old time's sake, so that Shin can enjoy the time he has left. With a psychopathic expression, the guy thinks that if this got exposed to the world, interesting things would happen. But at that moment, Kim ends the call. Chang, who was there and nervous, had been listening to the whole call. Feeling challenged, the spoiled one crushes his phone in anger, saying he's going to finish that bastard. He throws the phone at the wall, nearly hitting his assistant in the process. Trying to breathe and calm down, Jae-hoon asks his subordinate where the cleaner is. The woman replies that he was waiting for his master's signal. So the guy orders his assistant to find a way to bring Kim to him, even if it means dragging the boy across the ground. And so the assistant replies that she will inform the cleaner of her master's command. An unknown person enters the room, surprised that Jae-hoon called that person the cleaner. The spoiled one recognizes the man and is glad to see him, saying he's an expert at dealing with that kind of problem. Jae-hoon comments that although they started as business partners, they're now friends, saying that to the unknown man. But while handling one of Jae-hoon's collections, the man asks what the young guy thought they really were. Then the man says he heard something interesting on his way, how a Yun Deok-soo who acted like a shark was taken down by bait. He also says he feels like he'll have to clean up this mess now. Jae-hoon replies that there's a connection between himself and the insect who brought down Yun, and he's going to use this opportunity to finish it once and for all. We then find out that the unknown man is Nam Gung-kyuk, the director of Sunjin, and he tells Jae-hoon that his only job is to protect his client's personal information. That's why he doesn't want Sunjin involved in anything exhausting, and that this was Jae-hoon's problem. Chang Seok, being treated like a doormat and listening to all of it, thinks there's no chance Kim Shin survives now, and it looks like things will end very soon. Jae-hoon tells his business partner that the person he sent is enough for the job, and he won't need to do anything, because that person is highly reliable and the mission will be completed without any problems. Then we see several cars driving down the road. The convoy approaches the DS secret building. It is revealed that the cleaner is Shin Ta-jin, the former director of Hazen Construction, and he had arrived near the DS secret building. The man gives the order for his men to attack, and several people begin to ascend the stairs. It's clear that this is a coordinated assault on both the DS secret headquarters and the junkyard. Jae-hoon's subordinates who arrived at the DS secret office find absolutely nothing. The other half of the route that went to the junkyard also doesn't find a single soul. All of the men under the cleaner's command are left confused, wondering where those bastards had gone. Ta-jin realizes there's no one there, and so he wonders if his enemies noticed him and went into hiding, or if someone leaked information. However, he quickly dismisses that possibility, thinking there's no way they could have known about this. So the man assumes this is likely a trap. Ta-jin also concludes that if his guess is right, those guys were lying in wait and had a different target. Sumin, who is undercover near DS secret and keeping watch over the whole place, alerts Shin that they were there and he could make his move now. Then the cleaner concludes that those people were probably after Kim Jae-hoon. Our protagonist, approaching the building where his enemy was located, thinks that it's a 40-minute trip from home minus 30 minutes if you step on the gas. Inside, without a clue of what was about to happen, the spoiled brat was drinking wine while smoking a cigarette, and Shin concludes that they had 30 minutes and should begin the cleanup now. Leaning against her car, Sumin seemed lost in thought. In a flashback, we see her asking Shin why he was rushing things. Keb replies that he could no longer pretend to be dead, and that he would use this chance to take down Jae-hoon by surprise. Cha says that if he defeats Jae-hoon, the person backing him might cause chaos again, so the boy should reconsider. Our protagonist seems thoughtful upon hearing those words. He says 6 months at most, and hearing that, Sumin looks confused. The young man then reveals that Castle wouldn't make a careless move and that he would bring the organization down within 6 months. Hearing that madness, Cha responds that such a thing shouldn't even be possible. However, Kim simply states that this time he would bring some people with him and that Sumin should stay outside the building to report anything that happened. Back to the present moment, the girl thinks that Kim was right about the enemy arriving, and she didn't expect them to run like a pack of dogs. At that moment, we see the cleaner exiting the DS secret building and Cha, before leaving, thinks that those people were truly unforgivable. Our protagonist begins explaining the plan, saying that Jae-hoon's office is located at the top of the right-hand building, and the brat's bodyguards are stationed on the first floor of that same building. That's why they would infiltrate through the left building and enter the right one via the walkway. We then see our protagonist group taking the elevator inside the left building and heading toward the walkway. Kim finally tells his companions to keep in mind that they don't have time to mess around playing games against Castle, because they had little time before Jae-hoon's main group returned, only 30 minutes. Finally, he concludes that the reserve bodyguard group wasn't as well trained as the main one, so they would deal with him easily. Inside Jae-hoon's office, the brat's assistant begins walking toward him. She whispers something in his ear that causes him to drop his wine glass. With a crazed expression, the spoiled man asks how that bastard dared to come there. In front of him, Nam Gung-hook looked quite calm despite the situation. On the first floor of the right building, Jae-hoon's guards were gathered. One of them rushes in, declaring an emergency and saying they had intruders coming through the walkway. He also reports that all the elevators in that area had been stopped. The apparent leader of that group of guards asks what the hell is going on. We see that in the security room, Jae Wong, a member of the Hope faction, and Cheolman, a member of the Bujin faction, had eliminated all the guards there. This causes the remaining soldiers to start rushing toward the next elevator. One of them realizes that the door is locked. Meanwhile, some members of our protagonist's faction nearby are just observing the situation. The guards then decide to go through the emergency stairs and begin running together. All the soldiers start climbing until they come across some debris blocking the passage. The head of the contingent gets irritated, and one of his subordinates says they could still use the stairs in the left building near the entrance. So they begin rushing toward the left building. Kim had planned everything, which is why the young man ordered all the exits, except the one they came from, to be blocked, as it would be the same route they used to escape. The head of the soldiers spots something and realizes those bastards have planned everything. Then we see that guarding their escape route was a good number of members from the Hope faction, just waiting for the soldiers to arrive. With them was Jin-tae, who was sitting on the stairs. In a flashback, Shin tells his subordinate that, as he had said from the start, they would face stronger enemies there. And that's what Jin-tae had experienced in Russia. Still, Jin-tae seems calm and says it's time for him to make his comeback in Korea. However, our protagonist tells the boy to run away when things get out of control because he doesn't have to die for his revenge. Back to the present moment, Jin-tae wonders what was wrong with Kim, since running away was something he would never do. The blonde then starts mocking his enemies, noticing they were out of breath from having run so much to get there. He even says he had been through that hundreds of times, and was just like them when he was new to the game. Hearing that, some members in the Hope faction are confused, as that boy was acting like an old man. The guard's leader responds that he was wondering what was going on, but apparently it was nothing and the local thugs had just started a riot. He then orders his men to attack those punks immediately. We then return to our protagonist explaining the plan, and he says that all the remaining allies would run to Jae-hoon's office. So we see the boy and his allies heading toward the spoiled one. Kim thanks someone, and we can see that Pai Woo-jin was accompanying him. At the office, someone starts knocking on the door. Hearing the commotion, Jae-hoon thinks that Kim has gone crazy and wonders how Shin dared attack him in his own building. The young man then asks his subordinate about the situation. The woman explains that there are 10 security teams on the ground floor, and the cleaning crew will still take about 30 minutes to arrive. After saying that, the young woman declares she would like to ask her boss for a favor. However, Jae-hoon doesn't seem pleased and starts intimidating the girl, irritated with her. Calmly despite the situation, Nam Gung remarks that things were actually getting entertaining. After getting up and fixing his suit, he says he'll see what he can do for his colleague. Feeling grateful, Jae-hoon replies that he owes his partner one and will pay him back for the favor. As he leaves Jae-hoon's office, Nam Gung tells his bodyguards to follow him as they were heading down. Not far from there, our protagonist was running in search of his enemy's office. He was accompanied by some people until, for some reason, Shin's group suddenly stops. Nam Gung comments that Shin seems lost and asks if they were looking for Jae-hoon's office. Mockingly, he begins to explain to Kim how he should go to get where he wants. On the other hand, Dad Jian, upon hearing that, realizes who that person was. He warns his master to be careful, since that man was Nam Gung, the director of Sunjin, a company deeply involved with the castle and, as far as he knew, one of the most powerful figures within the castle. On Kim's group's escape route, we see a massive fight unfolding between the Hope faction and Jae-hoon's subordinates. The battle was intense, and even Won-il was in the middle of it. Woo-jin, who was with Shin, asked the young man to go ahead while he dealt with Nam Gung. Da-jan agrees and says he would help his friend hold those people back. Mocking his enemies, Nam Gung dares them to come at him if they have the courage. So the duo of friends charges toward Nam Gung. Pai tries to land a punch on his opponent, but the man remains far too calm. In the blink of an eye, he reacts, dodging the blow and counterattacking his enemy. Before Pai could even respond, Nam Gung grabs his arm and strikes the boy in the ribs. After doing that, he throws the boy, making Pai lose his balance. Then Nam Gung jumps in and lands a solid kick on Da-jan. The pair of teammates suffers serious injuries in the blink of an eye. Shin remains silent, observing the situation. Da-jian and Woo-jin are thrown to the side and begin to lament their situation. However, mocking them, Namgung orders P and Dajian to get up, telling them to return to the fight immediately. At that moment, we see that the timer showed 20 minutes until the cleaners group arrived. Recovering from the blow he took, Wu Jin says this is bullshit. And looking at the man in front of him, Pai wonders if that guy is even human. Dajian, already back on his feet, also seemed affected by the blow. The two friends exchange looks and Pai wonders if they have any chance against Namgung. Annoyed, Wu Jin admits he hates to say it, but the protagonist is out of his league, so he tells the boy to move on, while he and Dajian hold that guy off no matter what. Then the two teammates try to strike Namgung at the same time, but he dodges both attacks. Namgung charges at Dajian and tries to take him down. Meanwhile, the man's subordinate attempts to stab P with a knife. Wu Jin looks to the side and notices the attack, immediately countering his opponent. After knocking Dajian down, Namgung quickly turns toward Pai. But the long-haired boy is quick and spins with great speed, trying to land a kick on his enemy who blocks it. Namgung, being agile, manages to block and grab Wu Jin's leg. With his opponent's leg in his grasp, a muscular man uses his strength to hurl P against the wall. The director of Sujin turns toward our protagonist, realizing the boy is trying to get past him. To prevent his enemy, he prepares to punch Shin, but suddenly the man notices a fist coming his way. He has no choice but to dodge Dajian's strike, allowing Shin to slip past. Staying, he managed to distract the man. Dajian doesn't stop and tries to punch him again. Namgung ducks, evades, and counters with a punch that lands squarely on his opponent's chin. After the blow, Shin's subordinate is launched backward. The muscular man turns to stop Kim, but when he looks back, he realizes it's already too late, and the boy is far away. He notices Kim got through but says there's no need to worry, because the guards are there and so is that woman. Regardless, he decides to focus on what matters, and at that moment, Dajian and Wu Jin get up. Finally, the director of Sunjin concludes that he's going to start by getting rid of those two. He also declares that he'll make sure the pair never sees the light of day again. In the lobby outside Jae-hoon's office, some guards are watching the area. Nearby, Shin observes the scene as he begins to put on his gloves. As he takes a deep breath, the boy thinks that over time, memories fade. Comparing himself to his past self, he wonders how the hell he got this far. The young man tells himself he's asked that question many times, but every time he can't remember, and at that moment, he gets ready to act. Before moving out, he admits that, in truth, he didn't even try to remember. At that moment, the lights in the lobby where the guards go out completely. And as he walks through the darkness, Kim concludes that he didn't try to remember because the rage inside him had always been the same. The narrator remarks that every great incident in this world begins with a small occurrence, and so we jump to 10 years ago, in a school. A basketball game is taking place on a court. One of the students tries to stop Kim Shin, who has the ball, but fails miserably. Our protagonist gets past his opponent, jumps, and makes a basket. He lands angrily, impressing everyone there with his skill. Kim's friends praise him, and one of them wonders if the boy had quit studying to focus on basketball since he's so good at it. However, shortly after, we see that same friend looking at Shin's perfect report card. Stunned, the blonde boy questions how a human could score that high. As he follows our protagonist, the boy asks if Shin is going to study during lunch and invites him to watch a shuttler fight. Upon hearing that, Kim seems confused. Then the narrator explains that the shuttler fight is something peculiar. Students from different groups gather in a warehouse and fight each other. They fight like it's a game, and even if you just make eye contact with one of the shuttler fight fighters, you'll get beaten in public. Moreover, there was a reason that explained why they were allowed to do that kind of thing on campus. The reason was that Kim Jae-hoon was at the top of that school. Jae-hoon was a rich hair that no student or teacher dared to mess with. That bastard was the king of the school and was flattered by everyone. Kim says he never wanted to get involved with Jae-hoon and it had nothing to do with him until that incident. While our protagonist was in the classroom, a girl opens the door. Cha-soo-min places her bag on her desk and then sits in her chair. Shin, confused, wonders why she was there since she never stayed in class during lunch. Later that night, we see our protagonist climbing stairs in a back alley. The young man enters his house, surprised to see that his father was home so early, and the man is happy to see his son arrived. Taeha scolds his son for coming home so late at night. However, Kim says he already told his old man that he stays at the library until late. Taeha asks if he's hungry and says he'll make ramen, and upon hearing that, Shin asks if he's really going to make that again. Shortly after, we see a delicious ramen being cooked. Already eating the noodles, Taeha asks his son if that wasn't the best ramen in the world. Seeing the boy hadn't touched his food, Taeha asks what happened and if it was something related to school. He tells the young man not to push himself so hard as studying isn't that important, and that he wouldn't mind if the boy didn't become a police officer. In fact, the only thing he wished was for his son to live his life with honor, because honor is the secret to a successful life. Finally, he asks the boy to remember that, and Shin tries to change the subject. So the conversation continues with Taeha asking Kim if he had a girlfriend. While we see some fights, Kim says that to live a life with honor, you meet one requirement. That requirement was power. He adds that in order to apply justice, he needed power, something he didn't have. In the classroom, someone approaches Shin. A girl named Yusu, he asked the protagonist if he could help her with an assignment. Kim seems hesitant, unsure if he should accept, but he gives in and asks to see Yu's assignment, and the girl thanks him. Passing nearby was Jae-hoon, and his lackey looks through the window and notices Yusuhi. The guy comments to Jae-hoon that Yusu was his type and that she didn't match with trash like Shin. Jae-hoon looks at Yu, enchanted by her face. With a crazy expression, he flashes a huge smile. Finally, our protagonist concludes that everything happened after that, and at that moment, we return to the fight between the factions and Jae-hoon's subordinates. Soo lands a solid punch, smashing one of the lackey's faces. He then hits another enemy, knocking him out immediately. The muscular man leans his back against Jin Tae's so they can cover each other. Someone approaches the blonde and says they don't seem like normal guys. Hwang So-min Chul, the head of security, wonders how those bastards even got there. Seeing that his opponent also carried a knife, Jin Tae comments that he's going to enjoy this. Jin Tae and Soo will keep fighting together against several lackeys, and the blonde mocks his ally by calling him a gorilla. After hitting an enemy in front of him, Soo responds to Jin's teasing. The blonde admits, impressed, that Yi was better than he expected. Then Jin Tae asks Soo not to touch Hwang So-min because he wanted to deal with that guy personally. The leader of the Hope Group agrees and says he'll handle the other lackeys. After observing well, Soo comments that Hwang So-min seems strong and says that if Jin Tae couldn't defeat him, then he would. However, Jin Tae laughs and says he would never let that happen, because he would take that man down with his own hands. And with that, he charges at Hwang. Hwang, seeing his enemy approaching, immediately reacts by trying to stab the blonde, who barely dodges. Jin Tae keeps dodging his opponent's strikes while waiting for an opening. He gets ready and then tries to stab Hwang, who moves his body to the side, avoiding the knife. Even while dodging, So-min gets ready to strike his enemy. Once again, he launches an attack with his blade, but with great flair, Jin Tae leans his body backward. After that exchange of blows, the two opponents step back. Hwang comments that the blonde kid is very skilled and asks where he learned those moves. However, after observing him for a bit, the man assumes Jin Tae must have learned that in another country. With authority, he states that Jin wasn't the only one who trained abroad. That's why he's going to teach the boy the Kabukicho style, and after saying that, he pulls out another knife. As he charges in, Hwang claims that Jin doesn't stand a chance with those wild movements. However, before the man could even notice, Jin Tae slashes his arm. Even though he gets hit, So-min concludes that now he has the upper hand. But we soon see that's not the case when the blonde cuts part of his enemy's thigh. Jin Tae says that Hwang is definitely a veteran in this business, and the boy reveals that he knows where Hwang's fighting style comes from, mocking the guard for it. The head of security is surprised, wondering who this punk is since he didn't think people like him existed outside the castle. In Jae-hoon's office, the young man senses something that makes him nervous. Annoyed, he asks his assistant to do something, and the woman responds that she'll contact security. The spoiled hare tries to reassure himself, saying that Nam-goon went down to stop anyone from getting in, and besides, he had a special bodyguard with him, so everything should be fine. However, looking up at the sky, the young man says everything is starting to feel suffocating. He tells his assistant to wait a minute because it's gotten way too quiet out there. So he asks the girl to check what's going on outside. As she grabs a small dagger, the girl agrees and says she'll be right back. However, she and Chang Seok suddenly hear a scream coming from outside. Upon hearing that, Jae-hoon thinks that shouldn't even be possible. The guards in front of the lobby start panicking, saying someone is attacking them in the dark. One of the henchmen insists that it's impossible, claiming Director Nam would never let anyone through, but the guy is taken down with a stab in an instant. Since they're in the dark, none of them know what's happening or how to respond. Another man starts pulling out a knife and tells his teammates to fight even without lights. Suddenly, someone grabs his hand, stopping him from drawing the weapon. With ease, our protagonist stabs his enemy before he can even react. He then quickly turns and stabs another opponent. One of the guards spots the boy and tries to strike, but Shin is fast and dodges the attack. With a sneaky counter, he takes down yet another adversary. Having spent some time in the dark and adjusted his vision, one of the gangsters tries to focus and see if he can find Shin. Looking ahead, he manages to spot the boy coming toward him. He yells to alert the others that he's found the enemy. Even while being stabbed, the man doesn't give up and keeps shouting to his teammates that Shin is there. However, our protagonist easily silences him by hitting his neck with the hilt of the knife so he can't yell anymore. Another opponent charges at Kim, and the boy responds by crouching down. Once again, the gangster who missed earlier tries to stab Kim, but the boy dodges quickly again. After avoiding 2 consecutive stabs, the Amber Tiger drops another of Jae-hoon's guards, and to ensure the man can't fight back, he slashes the tendons in his heel. In a panic, one of the soldiers grabs his phone and turns on the flashlight to try to see something. As he lights up the area in front of him, all he sees is one of his comrades being taken out by Shin. Wondering how any of that is even possible, the guy tries to pull out his gun. But our protagonist subdues and disarms him in seconds. While all of this is happening and the phone of the defeated guard falls to the ground, someone exits Jae-hoon's office. Jae-hoon's assistant comes face to face with the scene of our protagonist, who has just defeated all the guards protecting that room. Seeing that the woman thinks the whole commotion didn't even last 20 seconds, and Shin had taken down about 10 trained bodyguards, so she assumes she wouldn't be able to handle that monster. The woman says that even if she joined the fight, by the time Director Nam arrived, she'd already be dead, and the most she could hope for was to buy some time. Looking at the imposing figure of our protagonist, the assistant states that if she fought that monster 10 times, she'd die in 9 of them. So while thinking she didn't want to die there, she crouches down and drops her weapon on the ground. The woman shows she is completely surrendering, saying that at this rate, Jae-hoon was already finished. Kim walks past her with an imposing presence, showing no hostility to the girl who had already surrendered. However, we see that she still had a knife on her back, and she begins to wonder if she should stab him from behind. But upon thinking that and looking at Kim, she feels a terrifying aura coming from him. The girl even feels as if her head had been severed from her body. Trembling, she instantly admits she had no chance against that monster, and everything she was doing in that moment was just for survival. She even sees our protagonist as a tiger and thinks that this sensation, that pressure, felt familiar. In a flashback, she remembers the first time she saw someone. She then reveals that the pressure Kim gave off was the same she felt when she first saw Baek Do-chan. So the poor girl concludes that she couldn't do anything, and she wasn't betraying Jae-hoon because that only applied to humans and Jae-hoon wasn't one. Inside Jae-hoon's office, a silence settles until the door opens. The spoiled brat, upon hearing it, becomes worried and asks if it was the secretary coming in. But Kim cuts him off, saying it's been a long time since they've seen each other, leaving Jae-hoon desperate. While ominously walking around the room, our protagonist comments that it's been 10 years since he last saw Jae-hoon. And with the expression of a complete psychopath, the young man stares at his desperate prey. Kim, remembering his past, recalls his father asking him to live a life of honor. The boy says he tried to forget those words, but he could still hear them clearly in his head. And those words could be dangerous for a hot-blooded teenager, as we see that honor was like a blue stone in his heart. In a flashback, we see Shin stopping his bicycle in an appropriate spot. While doing that, the boy hears some teenagers talking about Jae-hoon's birthday party. Shin notices that for some reason, Yusu was among a group of girls near Jae-hoon. The spoiled boy was smoking a cigarette while listening to the girls' conversation. We then realized that what was really happening was that Yusui's friends were trying to convince her to go to Jae-hoon's birthday party. The girl seemed hesitant, saying she had to work the next day, but her friends kept bothering her and even threatening her. One of Jae-hoon's buddies says it was getting annoying. He approaches, grabs Yusui's hand, and asks if she thought she was some kind of celebrity, forcing her to go with him. The jerk even says that when Jae-hoon invites someone like her, she should just accept. Shin calls out to Gu Sang-hoon, telling the jerk to let go of her immediately or he would have to deal with him. Gu Sang-hoon, hearing that, asks if our protagonist had really lost his mind. Jae-hoon, still smoking, responds by saying that this was perfect. Looking at Shin, he asks if the boy had just said he wanted to fight, and our future protagonist explains that this was a decision he shouldn't have made. Now gathered in the warehouse where student fights happen, Jae-hoon's 2 lackeys comment that this was going to be funny, and they teach Shin a lesson. They throw some gloves toward the boy and say he's going to get beaten up for acting all brave in front of the girls. Jae-hoon tells Shin he wants to say something before they begin. If he manages to beat his 2 lackeys, he'll forgive the boy for what he did today. Kim explains that this was the first time he experienced something like that, and we see Shin thinking Yusu had already left, which meant he had no reason to fight, so he would just be beaten up without reacting because that was the price to pay for his convictions. And at that moment, Gu Sang-hoon lunges and punches Kim in the face. After knocking down his opponent, the guy is surprised, saying he heard Kim was good at fighting, but that clearly wasn't true. Then they begin beating up our protagonist, who doesn't fight back. While being beaten, the boy thinks that it was getting exhausting and he didn't know if he could hold back. Something inside him begins to crack as he thinks he shouldn't hold back after all, that trash needed to be thrown out. Shin doubts himself since his father had told him he should only use his strength when necessary, and he feels as if something inside him is breaking. At that moment, the boy reacts by landing a solid kick to Gu Sang-hoon's face. After knocking him out, Jae-hoon's blonde subordinate gets angry and charges at Kim. However, the protagonist easily dodges a punch from the boy and immediately counters with a blow that sinks into the boy's chin. Even after defeating the two, Shin senses someone approaching from behind. Jae-hoon, in total cowardice, tries to knock Kim out with a bat, but the boy is quick and manages to raise his arm to defend himself. After that, he throws a cross at Jae-hoon, sending the guy flying backward. Still, that wasn't enough, so he lands another punch to the young man's face. After falling, Jae-hoon begins to beg Shin to stop and listen to him. Kim, on the other hand, keeps a furious expression without showing a shred of mercy for his prey. The spoiled hare tries to threaten our protagonist, saying he is Kim Jae-hoon. Realizing his words aren't working, he begins to threaten Kim more and more, while Kim just keeps walking toward him. Jae-hoon screams once again, telling the boy in front of him to stay back and not come any closer. Suddenly, Shin stomps next to Jae-hoon's head, nearly hitting him. With a terrifying expression, the boy yells that he doesn't care who his enemy is. The future Shin narrates again and states that from that day forward, he realized that was when it all began. We then see that after being threatened for the first time, Jae-hoon clenched his fists in rage. Shin says he never imagined things would end up that way just because of that incident. Elsewhere, we see the two buildings belonging to the Haesung family. Jae-hoon, sitting on a couch, asks his brother if he could do him a favor. The unknown young man responds that he can and comments that it's been a while since his brother asked him for anything. As he gets up, he asks what the hair of Haesung Constructions needs. Tae-hun approaches his brother from behind and says that no matter what happens, he is the hair of Haesung and shouldn't let any insect stand in his way. As a consequence, sometime later, we see Shin's father's coworkers questioning why the man was being demoted. Tae's colleague says the bribery accusation must be false, but the detective replies that he would accept any punishment if he had really done that. Shin says that his father never showed it, but suffering such an injustice after living an honest life caused despair to fall upon him. In his office, our protagonist remembers that he went to visit his father at work, but discovered the man had been demoted and accused of bribery. The young man is a bit surprised by the situation, not knowing how to react. Back to the moment in the office, Shin wonders why his father didn't tell him anything. Suddenly, someone approaches him carrying a table. Several of Jae-hoon's subordinates begin flipping over every table in the room, leaving only Shin standing. After locking and clearing out the entire room, someone places a chair next to our protagonist. Jae-hoon sits down, crosses his legs, and stares at the boy for a moment. The spoiled hare asks Shin what he's doing and if he can't see or rid the room. Shin, however, just asks what the hell that guy wants. Sarcastically, Jae-hoon says he heard that the boy's father was demoted and apparently accepted a bribe, which fuels Kim's rage. The boy also says Shin shouldn't be surprised since that was just the beginning. It warned him to stay away. Lost in thought, our protagonist reflects that the values his father upheld throughout his life were shattered by that bastard. Jae-hoon goes on to say he would forgive Shin if the boy got on his knees and begged for forgiveness, or licked the soles of his shoes, and even then he'd only think about forgiving him. With each passing minute listening to that, Kim's rage grows. The spoiled hare concludes that if Kim doesn't want to do that, he can just sit back and watch his father lose his job. Tired of the provocation, Kim punches his rival, sending him flying backward. The spoiled hare, who had been sitting in a chair, starts to topple over after the blow. Our protagonist immediately gets ready to punch Jae-hoon again. However, that bastard's subordinates begin to hold our protagonist back and stop him. Completely furious, the spoiled brat calls Shin a bastard. But before the boy could do anything, he is beaten by the many people around him. Kim then explains that it was unusual, but the police had to intervene in that student fight. Furthermore, he was the one arrested instead of Jae-hoon because the students, afraid of the police and the Haesung group, made false reports about him. Because of that, he was sentenced to juvenile detention for attacking Jae-hoon, and no one believed him anymore except for his father. We then see that Tae-ho went to visit his son and asked him to stay strong because he believed in him. Due to that entire situation, Tae-ho began to investigate the Haesung group and eventually uncovered a weakness he wasn't supposed to. One thing led to another, and because of that, he found clues about the existence of Castle and got too close to their Achilles heel. But he was nothing more than an ant crawling up the leg of those people. And just like that, he was murdered by Bak Du-chan. Sometime later at the funeral, we see our protagonist in shock, staring at the photo of his deceased father. Biting his lip in rage, he screams in hatred. We finally return to the present moment and see that Jae-hoon's reinforcements were arriving at the building with only 15 minutes left until then. Back to the fight between Jin-tae and Hwang, the battle was intense, with Hwang delivering several strikes at the blonde. As he tries to attack his opponent, Hwang thinks he's lost too much blood and that he's going to die if the fight continues. But seeing that damn punk moving at high speed in front of him, he wonders how he could stop the boy with those movements. The desperate man assumes he should lure Jin-tae in and decides to start by targeting his leg. So he pretends to fall to get closer to Jin-tae's left leg. The blonde falls for the trap and moves closer to his enemy, which is exactly what Hwang wanted. Hwang concludes that he's going to kill Jin-tae and moves in to try and attack him. However, the bastard is extremely fast and reacts by slashing the man's arm once again. The head of security, now completely injured, drops his weapon and wonders what had just happened. Jin-tae doesn't stop his strikes and goes in to slash Hwang's shoulder, injuring him even further. Lying on the ground, Hwang says he's the one who walked into a trap and that he was completely defeated in that fight. Then the blonde says that until now, Hwang had been the strongest person he had fought in Korea. Sewell was nearby, fighting some of Jae-hoon's guards. After defeating another enemy, the young man thinks that compared to these guys, the thugs from Huim were like schoolboys. Besides that, Sewell comments that they still had the upper hand, but most of their allies were already exhausted. More than that, they didn't have much time left, and if Kim Shin was even a little late, they'd be screwed. Another wave of reinforcements begins to arrive, and Jin-tae stays silent, just listening to the noise of his enemies approaching. Seul tells his comrades to get ready as a bunch of filthy birds were coming. The few remaining members of the Hope group are now facing an army of enemies, and Seul wonders if he can handle all those people. However, Shin's right-hand man was tired of it all and tells Seul that it's almost time. As he takes off his glasses and assumes a killer stance, the boy tells his comrades to get ready to go home. Seul scolds Jin-tae, saying this wasn't a situation where he could do whatever he wanted, that this was a surprise attack and they had to get the hell out of there. However, the blonde replies that in this situation, he actually had a huge advantage. So he tells the young man to enjoy the show he's about to put on. And with that, the madman charges at the army of enemies. The soldiers, armed with batons and knives, rush toward Jin-tae. The boy dodges 2 simultaneous strikes, running straight into the middle of the crowd. Like an unstoppable hurricane, he manages to wound and stab several enemies around him. At the same time, 3 lackeys charge at Jin-tae, intending to finish him off. But the boy is too fast and manages to dodge their attacks and stab them before they can react. Several people surround the young man to prevent him from escaping and to put an end to the situation. In response, the blonde doesn't hesitate and stabs 3 more enemies at high speed. One of the lackeys who is still alive asks if that guy was even human, and completely nervous, he wonders how that lunatic could run at an armed group with just a knife. Jin-tae continues stabbing multiple people around him without even getting a scratch. The blonde charges at a guard who's frozen in fear and takes him hostage. Even with a knife held to his neck, the guard begs his teammates for help and orders them to attack Jin-tae. With just one hand, Shin's right-hand man manages to defeat 4 enemies in front of him. He uses the hostage as a stepping point and leaps upward. As he lands on the ground, the young man delivers several blows to 3 guards ahead of him. The massacre continues, and even 2 attackers at once are not enough to stop Jin-tae. Cornered, Jin-tae uses the wall behind him to jump and gain momentum. He then pushes off his enemies, stabbing them as he keeps advancing on the rest. Noticing someone approaching, the boy throws his knife, hitting a thug coming his way. Now armed with just 1 blade, he doesn't give up and continues eliminating more enemies. A soldier armed with a massive knife tries to attack him, but his strike is blocked by the blonde's arm. Realizing his arm is entangled with his opponent's, Jin-tae drops his knife, letting it nearly touch the ground. He catches the weapon midair and stabs the guard behind him with his free hand. Like a beast charging its prey, the young man continues attacking and eliminating several guards. Seul watches the situation and is utterly shocked. The guy questions what the hell that was, since he had never seen or heard of anything like it, and wonders who the hell that guy is. He clenches his fist and calls for Insu, asking him to take care of the wounded brothers. At that moment, 2 guards rush at Seul, intending to stab him. But grabbing both idiots by the neck, the muscular man says he's going to take back his pride, which he lost for a moment, and with that, he slams both his enemies into the ground. Back in Woojin's battle, the boy is currently being punched by Namgoong. The blow is strong enough to hurl him straight to the ground. In his head, Pai thinks he can no longer even imagine winning. At that moment, Namgoong turns and throws a series of punches at Dajeon. The boy also can't withstand the blows and is thrown back. The dude hits the ground, unable to even land a single hit on the enemy in front of them. Woojin thinks that Dajeon has already reached his limit since he was still injured from the fight between Kim Shin and Yun Deok-soo. And at that rate, both of them would end up dying at the hands of that lunatic. He gets up and tries to attack Namgoong, thinking he could distract the man while his friend escapes. The Sunjin director easily dodges the strike by twisting his body and landing a hook to Woojin's solar plexus. However, determined to help his friend escape, Pai grabs Namgoong's suit. Then he strikes the muscular man, smashing his head into his. The director seems impressed by the blow and admits it caught him off guard. He didn't expect Woojin to attack like that. We then see that nearby there's an office separated only by a glass window. Someone is thrown against the glass, causing it to start cracking. It turns out that Namgoong had grabbed Pai and hurled himself through the window with him. After having his body used to smash through the window, Woojin crashes to the ground, badly injured. Namgoong doesn't give him time to breathe, grabbing his hair and slamming him into the floor. So beaten, Pai can't even react to the continuous attacks, and the muscular man keeps trying to land a kick to his enemy's face. He succeeds, sending Woojin flying several meters. The long-haired boy is completely defeated, lying atop some office supplies. Nearly losing consciousness, he wonders why he wasted all this time so pathetically. The boy even remembers his master, saying it was his fault for abandoning him. Not to mention he didn't do anything when his friends were struggling. He didn't help them the way he should have. The muscular man stands tall until Dajeon appears behind him. But Namgoong, being experienced, doesn't leave any opening and hits the boy with an elbow. Immediately afterward, he readies his fist to punch the boy again, until something makes him hesitate, and so he looks back. He sees Woojin charging at him like a beast. Pai begins unleashing several blows on his opponent like a monster, and Namgoong realizes that the boy's punches have gotten stronger. However, he was exhausted and wouldn't last much longer. After the flurry of attacks, the man counterattacks by striking Pai in the face. Even as he's thrown backward, Woojin manages to land a kick to Namgoong's chest. The young man, stepping back after the blow, wonders why that bastard kept getting up. Once again, the two charge at each other in battle that seemed endless, and Namgoong wonders why that boy kept standing up even knowing he would be knocked down. At that moment, the man uses a Juno move on Pai. He twists the boy's entire body, flipping him over and preparing to slam him into the ground. However, even mid-air, the long-haired one doesn't give up and punches Namgoong in the chin. Taking advantage of hitting his opponent, he recovers and lands on the ground with ease. Like a leopard, he leaps at Namgoong, punching the man several times before he can react. Even under all that pressure, the director of Sunjin remains calm while defending himself, and when he sees an opening, he kicks his opponent in the ribs. He follows that up with a punch, making Woo Jin suffer even more injuries. After those hits, the young man crashes into a table and falls to the floor on his knees. At that moment, he remembers his master saying that even if blood filled his throat and he had no strength in his legs, he should never lower his guard. And we see that, even kneeling and half-crouched, the boy was still holding up his guard. Namgoong stares at P and calls him a bastard. He thinks that damn kid didn't take the full blow because he turned his back to reduce the impact. Moreover, Woo Jin was recovering his strength at an incredible rate, and he really was strong. The man admits that guys like him are rare, and if he ever met Woo Jin again in the future, he'd definitely be much stronger. That's why the director of Sunjin decides he can't let that boy leave there alive. Once again, the two gorillas charge at each other. However, a sound interrupts their fight and a gunshot can be heard. Namgoong wonders if that really was a gunshot, surprised. Upstairs, we see smoke coming from a gun. With a psychopath's expression, Jae-hoon says goodbye to Kim Shi and fires again. Jae-hoon's reinforcements get closer and closer to the battlefield. Ta-jin thinks he lost contact with Jae-hoon's secretary, but since director Namgoong was there, everything should be fine. Still, he feels something was bothering him, and so he slams the accelerator. The group starts passing through a large tunnel when suddenly some motorcycles appear in front of them. The bikers begin throwing eggs to block Tojin's view. They also start throwing flour to mix with the eggs and make it even harder for Jae-hoon's support group to see. We also see that leading that biker group was Seong-ju, who signals for his companions to take action. They start dropping objects on the ground that bounce and hit the enemy's vehicles. Furious, Ta-jin thinks those bastards had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Even with that, he speeds up, passing through all the bikers and dodging their attacks. However, the young man notices a car ahead that doesn't belong to his team. Irritated, he wonders who the hell was doing that. We see that the one driving the vehicle is Sumin, who thinks she had to stall those people. She and her group had to buy as much time as they could, but the most she managed was a few minutes, so she asks Kim Shin to hurry. Back with Jae-hoon, the young man is in shock after firing his weapon. He looks at our protagonist while wondering if he hit the boy. The spoiled brat immediately curses Chang Seok, asking what he was doing and ordering him to attack Shin. However, nervous, Chang thinks no sane person would attack that guy, and he's also afraid of being hit by Jae-hoon's bad aim. While looking at our protagonist, Seok wonders what the hell he could do against that monster, and we see Shin drawing his blade. Even facing his opponent, Shin shows no hostility. Chang Seok realizes that Kim was letting him go, and so he takes action. Seok starts turning off his phone's flashlight while thinking he used this chance since Jae-hoon was already done, and there was nothing left to do but run. Jae-hoon, on the other hand, when faced with deep darkness, complains and asks why Chang turned off the light and where he was going. Desperate, the spoiled brat screams that when he finds Chang, he's going to kill him. Suddenly, he starts hearing footsteps that leave him completely shocked. In a panic, he begins shooting in all directions while begging Shin to stay away. But after a few shots, the gun runs empty and Jae-hoon becomes even more terrified. He quickly opens the drawer of his desk, trying to reload his weapon. As he begins putting bullets into the chamber, the young man thinks he shouldn't worry since Shin couldn't see anything in the dark either. However, he only feels Kim getting closer and taking the gun from his hand. Immediately, Jae-hoon turns, trying to land a punch on his enemy, but misses miserably. With authority, Kim slaps his opponent, drawing blood. Then he kicks the back of Jae-hoon's leg, forcing him to kneel. After those two hits, the spoiled brat just drops to his knees, unable to even react. In complete desperation, he tries to threaten Kim, saying that if he did anything, the castle would come after him. However, something happens that makes Jae-hoon start crying. The man sees right next to him our protagonist reloading the empty gun. He then decides to cooperate and says he'll hand over full authority of Hoon to Kim, and that they should resolve this peacefully since they're both adults now. After finishing reloading, Kim comments that back in school, when Jae-hoon acted like a gangster, he never went up to the rooftop, and there was a reason for that. Without hesitation, Amber Tiger fires the gun at the building's window, shattering it. Fearing for his life, Jae-hoon insists that Kim is a good guy and shouldn't do this, even saying he'd give part of his company to the boy. But Kim isn't interested in talk. He places the gun against the back of his opponent's neck and tells him to walk. Amber Tiger then forces Jae-hoon to the shattered window, putting him dangerously close to falling from the building. The spoiled brat, terrified and afraid of heights, apologizes repeatedly, saying this isn't right. Jae-hoon even claims that he wasn't actually responsible for Shin's father's death. He says the boy's father went too far just because of a kid who got sent to juvenile detention, and that's why the castle had him killed. The man argues that if Shin looks at it that way, he was the only one to blame for his own father's death. If he had just ignored them, things wouldn't have gone so far. But Kim remains calm in the face of it all and asks if those are Jae-hoon's final words. Knowing there's nothing more he can do, Jae-hoon snaps, asking what Shin wants to hear and threatening him again, saying the castle will come after him. However, our protagonist orders him to shut up and immediately throws Jae-hoon off the roof. In the middle of his fight, Woo-jin tries to stay calm, thinking he heard multiple gunshots and wondering if something happened to Kim Shin. Nam-goong calls for P and tells him to hurry up and finish this as he starts putting on his knuckle duster. The long-haired boy, even injured, doesn't seem intimidated and hardens his expression. Once again, the two brutes charge at each other, beginning a bloody exchange of punches. In that trade of blows, no one is left unscathed. They both ignore their injuries and focus only on attacking their opponent. Woo-jin thinks his nose is already broken, and that brass knuckle from Nam-goong is too dangerous. Even if he defends, it'll break him. Nam-goong tries to land a heavy punch on Pai, but he dodges. The long-haired boy then thinks this is his chance and tries to grab his opponent's arm. However, with his free hand, Nam-goong lands a clean cross straight to Woo-jin's face. The boy can't withstand the hits and starts to fall backward. Nam-goong takes advantage of the opportunity to finish the fight once and for all. Sometime later, we see the muscular man running up the stairs, heading for the top of the building. Woo-jin, who had been defeated, lies slumped against a wall, completely battered. The director of Sunjin finally reaches the floor where Jae-hoon's office is and is shocked by what he sees. Looking at our protagonist, he's in disbelief, admitting he underestimated that guy. The man also comments that he never thought that boy could take down all the soldiers by himself. Seeing Shin advancing toward him, Nam-goong realizes the boy is truly dangerous. So he decides he won't let the kid escape a second time and takes his fighting stance. Shin and the man stare each other down one last time before entering into battle. While waiting for Shin to approach, Nam-goong wonders from which side the boy would attack him. He imagines all the possible directions Shin might strike from, and it leaves him confused. However, he notices a strange movement from our protagonist and assumes the boy is trying to flee, so he attempts to capture him. But Kim ducks and strikes his enemy's thigh, injuring him. Even after the hit, Nam-goong stays firm, but still fails to grab Shin. The boy easily dodges and slips past his opponent. In the blink of an eye, he gains good distance from Nam-goong and escapes from the scene. The director of Sunjin, on the other hand, is left in shock, wondering how he lost that guy twice. But looking at the 10 defeated elite bodyguards in front of him, he realizes that it didn't matter. The man starts running toward Jae-hoon's office, thinking that above all, the CEO's situation was his top priority. Downstairs, we see a suited man hiding behind some desks. Nervously, he says he'll never work overtime again and wonders what Jae-hoon did to attract so many gangsters there. Looking at a photo of his family, the man also thinks it might be time to consider quitting, until he notices something falling past the window. Seeing something brown staining the glass, the man recognizes what it is. He goes to the window, and upon smelling the odor, he instantly realizes it's human waste. The man starts looking up to see where it came from until he hears someone pleading for his mom to save him. We then see Jae-hoon hanging from the outside of the building, defecating and urinating in fear. The spoiled brat starts begging for help, screaming desperately for his mom to save him. In a flashback, we see the moment he was thrown by our protagonist. Jae-hoon began falling toward the ground, but before he could hit it, he was caught by a rope. With his vision completely blurred by fear and panic, the boy breaks down. Jae-hoon keeps begging for Shin's help, shouting that he really doesn't like heights. He apologizes once again to his enemy, claiming he didn't mean to do what he did. Kim approaches the window and comments that he came there to kill Jae-hoon, but the boy's face kept telling him he shouldn't die so easily. So he declares he won't kill his opponent. Amber Tiger explains that it's easier to kill people than to let them live every day in fear, which is why he'll let Jae-hoon live to regret what he's done. With an imposing expression, he tells the boy not to forget that you reap what you sow, and that he still had the right to die for everything he did. Before leaving, Kim also orders the boy to remember that day for the rest of his life and the chills of fear he felt. Then someone starts pulling Jae-hoon back into the building. Nam-goong throws the boy onto the floor, saving his life. But the spoiled brat was already completely traumatized and keeps begging for his mom to save him. Holding his nose due to the stench, Nam-goong comments that the boy had completely lost it and wonders what he should do about him. Jae-hoon's secretary arrives at the scene and Nam-goong notices her presence. He then asks the woman if she was really going to let the gangsters just get away like that. We then see that our protagonist's group was running for the exit while fighting off several guards. One of the soldiers orders his comrades not to let them escape. However, he sees something that terrifies him and makes him stop immediately. In front of the guards, they see Jinta completely covered in the blood of his enemies. The blonde says he'll let them live if they don't cross that line. But if they break that agreement, no one will live to see the next sunrise. Hearing that, the guards are completely terrified, knowing what the boy is capable of. Back to the assistant. She says that honestly, to hunt them down, they'd need the cleaner, and she'd prefer to capture the gangsters later. Besides that, there was someone better than she expected among those gangsters, and in that moment, we see Shin helping Woo-jin to his feet. Nam-goong, lighting a cigarette, wonders how those jellyfish guards sneak into their territory. and with a commanding tone, he says he'll make every one of them pay with their lives. In his mind, Namgung thinks that this was the first time someone tried to enter their territory. At that moment, Ta-jin, the cleaner's car, arrives at the building. His reinforcements were also right behind, accompanying him. However, Ta-jin realizes that everything was already over and that he had arrived far too late. We then see several cars nearby caught in traffic jam. Ta-jin continues, stating that the castle wouldn't stay idle knowing that Kim Jae-hoon had been humiliated and that it was becoming a real headache. The narrator begins to explain that within 30 minutes, Jae-hoon had been attacked inside his own building. It's also shown that Woo-jin and Da-jeon were left completely injured from the battle. And the narrator continues, stating that Kim Shin was the one who completed the mission that was supposedly impossible. But no one was happy about that victory, because Kaesong Constructions was only half of the Haesung group and they had only faced half the challenge. Additionally, Shin's group came to understand the power gap between them and the castle. The next day, a photo went viral on the internet showing Jae-hoon completely humiliated, throwing trash off the rooftop. The comments on the post were varied and everyone was shocked that someone like Jae-hoon had been humiliated in such a way. The following day at a hospital, we see a man in a wheelchair leaving a room accompanied by a young woman. Jae-hoon's brother, Ta-hun, bows and welcomes the chairman. It's revealed that the man is Kim Yong-sung, the father of Kim Jae-hoon and the chairman of the Haesung group. It's also revealed that Jae-hoon had been left mentally shattered by what he had gone through. Yong-sung demands to know from his eldest son who the hell did that and who the lunatic was that dared to insult the Haesung group. However, with a weary face, Ta-hun replies that he truly didn't know. Furious, Yong-sung stands up and strikes one of his son's subordinates. He begins to violently beat the man, unleashing all of his rage and stress. After being thoroughly beaten, the bodyguard lies on the floor, not understanding what the hell just happened. Enraged, Yong-sung tells his son Ta-hun that he doesn't care. He just wants him to find the bastards who did it and bring them before him. The man with the parted hair simply replies that he'll do what his father desires. Sometime later, we go to a church. Inside, a bell is ringing, announcing something. The only person present is the cleaner, Ta-jin. The young man receives a call from someone at Haesung Constructions. While taking off his cap and finally revealing his face, he apologizes to his father in heaven, because unfortunately he was about to claim another victim, and at last, we see the cleaner's true face. We then move to Lee's tattoo parlor, which at night operates as an illegal medical clinic. Inside, we see that many members of the Hope group are being treated by the woman. While getting his wounds treated by Lee, Jin-ta tries to flirt with her. Watching the scene, Sewell comments that the boy is smiling like normal even after all the chaos, and he still can't forget the kid's movements. He also wonders what's up with Jin-tae's body, seeing all the scars, and even questions if the boy had fought in a war. Our protagonist is sitting on a bed, deep in thought, when someone asks if he got his revenge. Stu-min says she always believed that Jae-hoon would one day be punished by the heavens, and it seems like that really happened. She then asks what the boy plans to do next, since Yong-sung wouldn't just sit still after what he did. She also comments that her group isn't in a good state right now, and if he plans to fight against Yong-sung, he'll probably lose. Kim reveals that Ta-hun is the true mastermind of the organization, and that he's planning to meet with Kim Ta-hun to negotiate. Soo-min is confused and asks what our protagonist has to offer Ta-hun, but the boy immediately replies that he has nothing. Yet very soon, he'll have something valuable to negotiate with Ta-hun. At that moment, we see Jae-hoon's brother getting into a car. Driving is Jae-hoon's assistant. The woman apologizes for troubling the president and says she'll accept any punishment for not acting during the battle. Ta-hun replies that he respects her decision as there was nothing she could have done against that guy. She would have just been digging her own grave. She then begins to talk about the group that attacked them, and upon hearing that, Ta-hun becomes quite interested. Finally, the assistant reveals that the ones who attacked the Haesung group were the new Hoeing faction, and their leader was Kim Shin, who had gathered the remaining gangsters of Hoeim and taken over DS Secret, a branch of Haesung Constructions. She also says he was a former classmate of Jae-hoon in high school and was sent to juvenile detention after getting into a fight with Jae-hoon. And later, his father was killed by Castle, an act personally ordered by President Yong-sung and carried out by their representative, Bak Du-chan. Ta-hun asks what Shin had been doing until now, and the woman explains that a person is declared dead if their whereabouts are unknown for more than 8 years. And now he was finally back and had revealed his identity. He had also inflicted trauma on CEO Jae-hoon. Ta-hun comments that his brother wasn't the type to be easily traumatized and that Kim Shin's skills must be recognizable. He also asks if she had seen him. The woman replies that she had, as she was there when he attacked the headquarters of the Haesung Construction Company, and he was skilled enough to take down 10 elite guards. Not only that, but she says Shin was seeking revenge, so he would definitely come after all of them, and they needed to get rid of the boy as soon as possible, because all the chaos in Hoeim was caused by him, and if they eliminated the boy, everything would settle down. Ta-hun promptly agrees and asks his assistant to call Tae-jin to handle it, since he alone should be enough. Upon hearing that, the woman recognizes the name and comments that guy always does the dirty work despite being religious. And he was also one of the 2 swords that protected the city. Not only that, but he was among the best in the region and the only one you could trust for the job when Baek Duchan was busy. Back at the church, Taejin begins to leave until the priest asks if he was leaving early today. The priest says Taejin hadn't even done his confession that day, and that was strange. However, the cleaner just leaves, placing a bag of money there. The priest, upon seeing it, comments that, as always, he left the money behind and left without saying a word. Taejin approaches a place with a safe and opens it. Inside, he finds information about his new targets and their photos. The man quickly heads to his locker, grabs some weapons, and prepares for battle. He thinks that a piece of information is missing, but it's already known that the black-haired guy was strong enough to take down 10 elite guards and escape from Namgun. And for that reason, he assumes our protagonist must be a strong guy, maybe as strong as people from Castle. Sometime later, we go to the junkyard at night. Taejin begins to philosophize as he prepares to put on a mask. After covering his face, he gets ready to finish the job and says that people like him and Shin are always ready to die. The man sneaks to the container door where our protagonist is and wonders how fast Shin will react. As he opens the door, he says the boy couldn't blame anyone, since this is a world where both the strong and the weak exist. Looking through a crack, he realizes Shin wasn't lying on the bed. The cleaner senses that his opponent is on the other side of the door, and we see Kim pointing a gun at him. The man violently opens the door, ready with his knife to disarm his enemy. Our protagonist gets ready to pull the trigger, but is stopped as Shin moves his gun to the side. Taejin skillfully disarms our protagonist and takes the pistol for himself. He then tries to stab the boy, who easily dodges. After that, Shin kicks his enemy far away, throwing him several meters back. Determined to end it quickly, Kim charges at his opponent, who was tossed back. With a knife in hand, he tries to stab Taejin to finish him off immediately. But Taejin is clever and uses the pistol he stole from his opponent to block. After that, he tosses the firearm away and uses the knife in his other hand to slash our protagonist's wrist. The boy, looking at the blood running from the wound, is clearly impressed by his opponent's skills. Taejin, pushed back by the momentum, lands several meters away but quickly hits back up. He realizes he was also cut and, in his head, says the rumors were true, also asking Kim how he knew he would be there. Kim replies that it was obvious. It was easy to predict that Haesung would send someone to eliminate him. While looking at his blade, Taejin thinks he's sure the boy is alone and that no one else is there. The two then stare at each other, preparing to resume the fight. Finally, the cleaner concludes that the madman was using himself as bait to lure him in. And if that were true, Shin was quite arrogant and all he thought about was victory. Determined to put an end to it, the assassin charges at our protagonist, thinking the boy was stupid. While trying to strike, the man says that if Shin thought he was a tall mountain, he should know there were even taller mountains than him. Shin, on the other hand, manages to throw his body backward, dodging a stab that nearly hit his jugular. Sharply, he leans his body back to its original position and tries to stab his opponent, who dodges to the side. As if throwing a hook, but with a knife, Taejin attempts to strike Shin, who pulls his head back to avoid getting his brain pierced. Seeing his enemy too close, our protagonist launches another attack to create distance, forcing Taejin to back off to dodge. After noticing that his opponent had lost balance, Kim charges in to end the fight. He prepares his blade and aims for Taejin's chest, catching him off guard. However, the madman blocks the knife with his own hand and counters by slashing Amber Tiger's shoulder. Amber Tiger quickly retreats, surprised by that move. Looking at his enemy, the protagonist thinks this isn't one of his usual targets, and if he kept fighting the cleaner, he might end up getting cut, because that guy was strong. The boy also notes that he saw Namgun the other day, and Taejin was very similar to him. That was the strength of one of the castle's key figures. Not only that, but the castle's walls were just as high as he'd expected. Meanwhile, the assassin, staring at Kim, realizes that the atmosphere has changed for some reason. Kim, furious, takes a predator's stance, intimidating his opponent. Meanwhile, we shift to another place, a ring of illegal fights in Vladivostok, Russia. Lisa is telling someone that 3 days ago, Python returned from Korea, and he was just as terrifying as people said. A man smoking a cigar asks if she's referring to the fellow assassin and wonders what someone from the past is doing there. The woman replies that Python actually had a hearing to summon Iskra, and now she wasn't going to hide from him. The bald man next to her says that's insane. It's basically declaring war, and it's a bit disappointing that Amber Tiger left. The blonde continues and explains that the Iskra organization doesn't trust the deported one, so she was thinking about asking Medvedi for a favor. We then see that this man is Medvedi, an assassin affiliated with Iskra, and the manager of the illegal fight ring, and Lisa asks him to go and complete the story with Python. Back to Kim's fight, we see a flurry of exchanged blows. Taejin tries to cut our protagonist in various ways, but the boy is clever and dodges all of them. In his mind, Kim thinks this is one of the strongest opponents he's ever faced in Korea so far, and a small hesitation could cost him his life. He then swings from left to right, trying to slash Taejin's neck, but the assassin is skilled and uses his own knife to block the strike. But that was exactly what Kim wanted, and right after, he punches his opponent in the chin. With the path clear, Kim moves to stab Taejin. However, he senses a foot coming at him from the side, so he abandons the attack and ducks to avoid being hit. Vinci the assassin had used his hands on the ground to perform a spinning kick at Kim. After that, he steps away from the boy, regaining his stance. Completely slashed, Tae-jin thinks that the boy's movements are too fast to follow with the eyes, and he needs to stay alert. That boy was one of the strongest people he had ever faced, so he begins removing his mask, which means he intended to fight to the death. The man thinks this fight could cost him his life if he makes a mistake. He then tells Shin that this is a problem, because now that Kim has seen his face, he can't let the boy live. Our protagonist immediately realizes that this is a fight to the death. In the reflection of a car's rearview mirror, we can see the two fighters staring at each other. Tae-jin quickly charges with his blade, nearly hitting our protagonist, who narrowly dodges. The boy raises his hand to deliver a downward slash and wound his opponent, but swiftly, the cleaner draws another small knife he had hidden in his holster. With that quick movement, he manages to stab our protagonist's arm. Moreover, the assassin also starts to push our protagonist against the wall, shoving him near a car. Tae-jin doesn't give up and keeps pushing his enemy while continuing to stab his right arm. Our protagonist lets his body fall backward and uses his leg to strike the inner thigh of Tae-jin. After that, he regains his posture, showing a murderous expression. Next, he begins to advance and deliver several slashes that hit Tae-jin's body. The cleaner starts falling backward and uses his leg to kick the arm Kim was using to hold his knife. Kim realizes that his enemy had fallen near the firearm they had dropped earlier. So Tae-jin grabs the gun on the ground beside him, unlocks it, and pulls the trigger. He nearly hits our protagonist, only managing to tear part of his clothes, and is almost stabbed by Kim. Shin then punches his opponent's face while he's on the ground, but Tae-jin prepares to escape. He retrieves his knife, cutting our protagonist's arm. Then the man rolls to the side in order to escape the boy. Once he recovers, the young man immediately gets up, wielding his blade. However, Kim mysteriously appears in front of him, slashing Tae-jin's chest. The assassin imagines he's seeing a beast in front of him and states he couldn't find any weakness in that creature. Even so, the young man doesn't give up and charges toward Amber Tiger, who is forced to retreat. Tae-jin catches up to him and the two exchange blows, blood spraying everywhere. In a flashback, we see the assassin sitting on one of the church benches, thinking it had been a long time since he desired that. Looking at a cross in his hand, he seems deep in thought. Back in the present moment, he concludes and states that he always wished for true power that would end his life. Our protagonist sees an opening in Tae-jin and is confused by it. He dodges his enemy's strike and then kicks the cleaner's inner thigh. The cleaner, on the other hand, seeing his opponent coming forward, thinks that this is the chance to end it. Then Shin, after kicking Tae-jin, uses the motion to stab the young man in the chest. The assassin, falling to his knees, questions what Kim was waiting for. Our protagonist doesn't seem satisfied and asks why he gave up so easily when he was fast enough to dodge that strike. Even so, the cleaner states there's no need for conversation, saying Shin should finish it quickly since he no longer had the will to fight. The man even threatens Shin, saying that even if he kills him, all the boy's subordinates will die. Kim, confused and wearing a terrifying expression, once again asks why he wants to die so badly. The young man seems thoughtful upon hearing that. He closes his eyes, opening his arms as if accepting his fate. Kim replies that if that was his will, then he would do it. Then a blow is delivered, and we see Tae-jin's cherished necklace falling to the ground. At the junkyard, we see several people talking while Tae-jin wonders why he's still alive. When he opens his eyes, he sees Sul in front of him, which frightens him greatly. Tae-jin immediately moves his body, feeling some pain due to his injuries. Looking at his bandages, he thinks the knife definitely hit a vital spot, and he's confused about why he's still alive. Nearby were Sul, Dajian, and Woo-jin, and Sul says the young man can relax because their boss asked to keep him alive. The assassin realizes that Kim had purposely spared his life, and the reason was quite obvious. That's why he says if our protagonist's faction planned to use him as a bargaining chip, they should forget it. Since President Tae-hun wouldn't even consider negotiations, he even asked the guys to bring Kim Shin over there. However, Sumin approaches the place and replies that Kim Shin wasn't there at the moment. The girl also explains that their boss was out meeting someone. Hearing that, the cleaner is shocked, questioning if Amber Tiger was insane. Back in Tae-hun's car, something happens that causes the driver to brake sharply. The man apologizes to the president because suddenly a car blocked their path. We see Jin-tae in disguise and the blonde man starts arguing with Tae-hun's driver. The Haejung secretary thinks she's seen that bastard somewhere before. The driver gets out, asking his master to wait as he would be back soon, but the woman beside him asks him to wait a little. The bodyguard of Tae-hun approaches Tae-jin, and while threatening him with a knife, the blonde man tells him to stay still or he's going to suffer a lot. Suddenly, someone enters the car, and the assistant asks why the hell that person is there. Disguised, our protagonist sits next to Tae-hun, and a silence settles in. Jae-hoon's brother questions the thugs if they have any idea who he is. However, as he removes his cap and reveals his face, Shin states that he knows all too well and says it's a pleasure to meet President Tae-hun. Tae-hun realizes that the guy next to him is the one who did that to his brother and says he recognizes him because he did some rather amusing things. Jin-tae, on the other hand, while holding one of the bodyguards hostage, notices someone in front of him. He sees several men dressed in black staring at him, and Tae-hun comments that Shin has taken things way too far now. From the car providing Taehan's security, someone starts to get out. A man with a terrifying expression named Ru Jin-kan reveals himself. Looking at the man, Jin-ta remarks that he really does look strong. Inside the car, Taehan's assistant stands up while brandishing a knife. Yang Sung's son states that Shin's subordinates and he won't live to see the next sunrise if they so much as make a single move. However, the boy remains unfazed as usual and starts doing something. He pulls something from his jacket that makes the assistant visibly nervous. But Kim simply draws a box, inside which is the knife that belonged to Ta-jin. The woman and Taehan immediately recognize it and are left completely stunned. Shin, on the other hand, says that all he ever wanted was control over the city of Hoim and revenge, and that now he has both. With a confident expression, he states that Taehan didn't need to share the Haezong group with his younger brother. Feeling challenged and with an intimidating expression, the man says the boy really does say some amusing things. Amber Tiger says he doesn't need much in life, he just wants to save what's left of it and keep living. He also mentions that he has no surviving relatives and that if Taehan wanted, he could wipe out him and his group in an instant. But Yang Sung's son chose not to do anything, so he would take any job Taehan offered. After saying that, he bows and asks the man for help. Seeing this, silence fills the car and the assistant is simply stunned by the scene. The man is quite surprised but tells Shin that that's enough and that he should leave. Taehan says Kim can go and that he'll consider the proposal and let the boy know his answer soon. The secretary is even more confused by this, and Kim says he's looking forward to their cooperation. Then the woman next to the president asks if he really believes in Kim's words. The man replies that Kim isn't trustworthy, but he could kill him whenever he wanted. And if Ta-jin couldn't get rid of Kim, he's certain Ru Jin-kan will. Besides, he doesn't think Kim is a major problem since they have two important people who can take him out at any time. Taehan tells the secretary that where they're heading now is an area filled only with monsters, and those who try to harm Haezong have no idea such power is backing them, and what happened with Ta-jin was unexpected. But regardless, there's always a new power emerging, so he wants to see if Kim can survive in the city of Hoim, and if he has the skills to do that, he'll accept his deal. But if not, he'll be as good as dead. The man concludes that either way, the secretary let something slide this time because Shin isn't a dragon. In the first place, he's incredibly bold, and it's even hard to believe, but Kim Shin is one of the best toys they could have ever gotten. And so we return to our protagonist speaking with Jin-ta. The boy tells his right-hand man that the guy Taehan sent yesterday was on the level of the Iskra Association. Amber Tiger adds that his enemy gave up on purpose, and he wouldn't have beaten the guy easily if he hadn't. And the next day, he also came across a guy named Nam-gung, which means they need to learn more about Castle, and until then, they'll keep quiet. However, this is just the beginning, and they'll wait for the right moment. Shin gets into the car with his subordinate while asking them to head back to the junkyard. We return to where Kim's group was gathered along with Tae-jin. Sumin notices that Kim had returned and asks if his expression meant the negotiation with Taehan had gone as planned. The boy replies that Taehan said he would think about it and that they should stay on alert until then, because the man would notify him soon when needed. Our protagonist hands a cigarette pack to Ta-jin, and the assassin asks why Kim didn't finish him off. The boy ignores the question and simply says he borrowed Ta-jin's knife for a while. Kim also explains that he told Taehan he had killed Ta-jin, and that should help the assassin. Confused, the cleaner asks what the boy was planning and wonders if Shin was trying to use him in his schemes. Amber Tiger responds that he couldn't guarantee what he was going to say, but he states that he wanted to help Tae-jin live a new life if he wanted it, but he needed something in return, and that was information about the castle. The assassin starts laughing maniacally upon hearing that. While touching his wounds, he says that Kim Shin was really very interesting. Ta-jin states that whether or not he gives information to Kim and whether or not he's on his side, he'll have to pay for the mission he failed, and all the guys there will die. The man also admits that Kim was strong and skilled to a level that no one in Korea could reach except for the people inside the castle. Thoughtful, the cleaner begins to wonder if our protagonist was from the Yakuza in Japan or the tribes in Hong Kong. He says he could tell exactly where the people he fights were trained, and all the skills Kim had were top level. Finally, he concludes that the boy was from Iskra in Russia, leaving Shin surprised, and taking that statement as true, he comments that it explains Kim's strength. In other words, Shin might be as strong as the top members of the castle. However, this wasn't a fairy tale, and if our protagonist wanted to live, he had to give up. Because if they mark the boy, he won't have any chance of survival. We then jump to the city's center, where there were several buildings. In one of the buildings, Taehan was accompanied by his secretary. The woman calls the elevator for her boss, but she didn't need to do that because the door starts to open. The person inside the elevator recognizes Taehan and says it had been a long time since they last met. We then see Woo-sung, the formal representative of the Chinese division of the Black Dragon Triad, along with his bodyguard Ling Ling, and Woo asks Taehan to enter so they can go up together. The four of them begin ascending in the elevator. Taehan's secretary and Ling Ling stare at each other with tension in the air. Woo-sung boldly says he heard about what happened with Taehan's brother, asking if the boy was okay and how he planned to celebrate it. However, the Four Eyes just orders Woo-sung to stop joking around. The Chinese man starts laughing, saying that sometimes it was fun to provoke CEO Kim. Before leaving, Woo-sung grabs Tae-hun's shoulder and says that if the boy ever needed anything, he could call them anytime since he was just as capable as Representative Baek. The man even dares to say that his boys are good at making people disappear with no problem. However, proud as he was, Tae-hun simply replies that he didn't need any help and exits the elevator after saying that. The two men start being searched by the guards of the place. Back to our protagonist, Tae-jin explains that the biggest reason he couldn't defeat the castle was the existence of the 7 pillars. Woo-sung and Tae-hun enter a room and a round table with 7 chairs is visible. Then we are introduced to the 7 pillars, one of them being Kim Hwan, the director of Gold Capital and a major player in the loan market. We'd also meet Ah Mu-yeol, a former Yakuza boss and CEO of Mori Trust Investments. Another member of the 7 is Chun Il-do, CEO of Hotel Castle, and an older man with a scar over his eye. Among the 7 were also familiar faces like Yu Woo-sung, CEO of Huijin, and Tae-hun, the president of the Hysun Group. Lastly, Baek Do-chan, a former Russian assassin and commercial representative who was not at the meeting. A man inside the room comments that Representative Baek wasn't there due to a trip to Russia, so someone else would come in his place. A man is seen walking out through a door. All 6 people in the room are completely shocked to see him. It is then revealed that this is Choi Min-wook, the founder and head of Castle, who welcomes everyone present. Tae-jin explains that it started with a truce, but after that, Castle rose to a whole new level. Not to mention their influence in politics and commerce. From the Yakuza to the triads in Asia, the mafias in Europe and North America, and the cartels in Latin America. They have influence over all of them, and there is no place Shin can run to. With a serious expression, he warns Shin not to forget that he won't be the only one to die. However, while hearing all of this, our protagonist remembers his master and his father, who were killed by Castle. Suddenly, someone opens the door of the place saying that on the day Castle falls, he will celebrate, because those insects are disrespecting their country. We see that the one who said that was Sewell, and the muscular man asks his boss if he was connected to the Iskra group. Stu Min also appears to be listening to the conversation and comments that she's not the least bit surprised. Dad Joan apologizes for eavesdropping and for being disrespectful. Woojin appears behind him, stating that up until now they've been living like corpses, just breathing. And if Tae-jin wanted to die before, he could drop that idea and live a new life. Jin-tae, seeing how Pai's attitude has changed, asks what happened to that bastard. Dae-jin calls out to Tae-jin and says they all know very well the difference in power between them and Castle, but they won't back down and are going to fight them, even if it costs their lives. Finally, the man says he's ready to do anything to bring Castle down, and Tae-jin can wait and see. The assassin seems intrigued after hearing that and says he'll share a few things about Castle. Kim speaks up and says they already know about the 7 pillars of Castle, and he wants to know specifically about the powers supporting those pillars. He wants to know about Nam-gung, Tae-jin, and the others upholding those pillars. Then the boy asks how long Tae-jin has been in Castle. The cleaner concludes that since Shin is so eager to die, he'll tell him everything he knows. So the man states that above him there were 10 people, and each one was chosen by the 7 pillars. And the worst part is that they're all world-class. Upon hearing that, our protagonist's group is completely stunned and surprised. Tae-jin continues, saying that these 10 are known as Castle's representatives. And Nam-gung was also one of those 10. Upon hearing this, Da-jian and Woo-jin become interested. Jin-tae interrupts and asks about Baek Do-chan, if he was also a representative. The assassin retorts that if Jin-tae is from Iskra, he should know Pitten, and comments that he'll never forget the first time he saw the guy. The man explains that when Baek Do-chan joined Castle, some people questioned his abilities. So Pitten crushed all of those people, proving all of his capabilities and instilling fear throughout Castle. And of course, he was among the 10 representatives. And now that he thinks about it, there have been rumors going around for a while. Rumors saying that Baek Do-chan has become an utterly untouchable existence. So the man decides to ask our protagonist something. He asks Kim how many allies he has who can defeat people like him or Nam-gung. After hearing that, everyone in the room seems slightly offended. Tae-jin concludes that if Kim plans to take down Castle, he better have at least 5 world-class people. Otherwise, he can't go head-to-head with them. The assassin then asks if Kim was thinking of sitting around lazily, expecting Castle to just stay put. He concludes that it's already too late because Kim has already started the fire, and if he's lucky, he might survive. Amber Tiger decides to speak and says that, as Tae-jin mentioned, a full-scale war with Castle right now would end in their defeat, and he doesn't want to plan a doomed battle. The boy says that Castle is inherently a powerful organization, and it's only natural that they'll die if a conflict starts. So he plans to begin by taking down the representatives holding up the pillars, and Kim also reveals that he has a piece of information left behind by his master. That information was that Kim Sun-kyu from the Innovation Group is a presidential candidate and a VIP. Upon hearing that, even Tae-jin is surprised and shocked. The man can't believe that this is really the identity of the VIP, since it's the first time he's hearing this and he's confused as to how Shin knew it. We then return to the meeting of the 7 pillars. Choi Min's assistant says a few things and then reports that the president will handle the agenda related to the VIPs directly. Choi Min begins to speak to the 7 pillars, saying that as they know the outcome they've all invested in for years is just around the corner. Until the end of the presidential election, they should stay alert regarding private arms deals and the use of firearms, stating that conflicts between factions were forbidden. He asks all of them to remember that. At that moment, we see a contrast between the castle's president and our protagonist, who says that something will happen in 6 months. Choi Min then says that at the end of that period, Castle will be reborn as the greatest cartel in history, untouchable by anyone. And our protagonist says that in 6 months, it will be the only moment when they can strike, and the assassin realizes our protagonist wasn't joking. Ta-Jin realizes that Kim really was planning to do it, and that the boy truly intended to bring down Castle. Finally, Ta-Jin comments that he thinks their conversation is over. Kim seems thoughtful with all that information. Then we are taken to St. Petersburg, Russia. We see some armed thugs running, and one of them says their boss is in danger. Another asks how those bastards dared to invade their base. On the other side of the wall, the young man starts hearing a loud noise. Suddenly, a jeep bursts through the wall, running over the thug and finishing him off. All the gangsters around question what the hell is going on and get ready to shoot at the car. However, we see that on top of the jeep is a blonde guy with a submachine gun. That was Snapper, Iskra's specialized assassin. Snapper starts firing wildly at all his enemies, taking them out. Sometime later, we see several soldiers defeated on the ground. A desperate man is opening a safe for someone. The well-dressed man shows that the safe contains $100,000 and begs for his life in return, just as the guy in front of him had promised. The madman holding the pistol says he doesn't look like someone who keeps promises, and he tried his best to do that but failed. We see that Snapper was accompanied by someone, and the blonde starts laughing. The desperate suit says he made a deal with this person. However, Komodo doesn't seem to care and begins to draw his gun to finish him off. Then we see Komodo and Snapper together, gathering a pile of money. The blonde comments that, as expected, local business trips are the best, and that this was definitely fun. Komodo, on the other hand, says he's getting tired of doing this kind of work, and that he didn't join Iskra to deal with money. In response, Snapper says a bit of money never hurts, and Iskra is the only gang where you can make this much money. Changing the subject, Komodo says he heard that Python is picking useful assassins, and while stabbing some stacks of cash with his knife, he questions how strong the guy must be. Snapper asks his boss why he wants so badly to test Baek Du-chan. The man replies that he wants to check whether their generation is better than Python's, and if he's not all that, they can prove their skills and make their demands. But if his skill is as good as the rumors say, then they'll follow Baek Du-chan and destroy Iskra together. Snapper seems to agree and says that sounds good, since whoever wins takes everything. With a psychopathic look, Komodo says he wants to find out if Python is really as good as the rumors say. Now in Vladivostok, Russia, Komodo sees that Python entered through the roof and comments that he thought the guy would be braver than that, and that he wasn't living up to his name. Snapper thinks he doesn't seem like an average guy, and that he earned the codename Python, which sounded stealthy and venomous. And right after, the guy jumps while holding onto a rope. Seeing his subordinate leap, Komodo tells the guy to do as he pleases, but he warns Snapper not to go easy on Python or he might end up dead. Later, we see the guy with the scar on his face walking through the corridors of the building he invaded. In his head, Komodo thinks it's strange since there were no traps there, and he wonders why his subordinate Snapper was so quiet. He says there's no way the legendary Python is that weak, but Snapper wasn't exactly easy to deal with either. Then he enters a room that looks extremely luxurious. Sneaking through the area, the boy thinks he had a bad feeling, until he sees something that leaves him completely stunned. The man sees Snapper completely defeated, slumped against a wall. Before he can react, he senses a presence behind him. Immediately, Baek Du-chan uses his elbow to stop Komodo from shooting him. The man with the scar on his face recognizes that this is Piton. From his sleeve, the assassin tries to draw a knife, but Piton is faster and punches him in the face. Komodo begins to fall backward but manages to recover and grips his weapon. He then tries to shoot his enemy, but Piton outmatches him and deflects the shot, changing the bullet's trajectory. Baek Du-chan disarms his opponent, throwing both his weapon and Komodo's far away. Komodo notices that for some reason, Piton also deliberately threw away his own weapon, and before he can defend himself, he sees Baek Du-chan about to act. The man then delivers a powerful punch to his enemy's chest. Komodo is hurled several meters away, crashing into an object. When he hits the ground, he begins spitting blood. As he walks toward his target, Baek Du-chan says that several Iskra assassins are active and Komodo was much better than the ones who came before. He then asks Komodo if his specialty is knives, throwing the blade beside him. Piton also declares that it's great since the use of firearms is quite limited in Korea, making knife users like him very useful. And with a terrifying expression, the Four Eyes orders Komodo to show him some of his tricks. Picking up the knife that had been thrown beside him, the scar-faced man says he's going to cut Piton and kill him. In his mind, he thinks the rumors were wrong. Piton is stronger than people said, and from now on, it's a death game. He then charges at his enemy, who dodges all the attacks. Komodo tries once again to strike Baek Du-chan, while saying he's going to send him to join Snapper. After missing with his knife, he jumps to kick Piton. Meanwhile, The man says he doesn't know much about loyalty as he doesn't follow anyone, and it seems like Komodo manages to kick his opponent. However, Bak Do-chan reveals that he blocked the strike with just one hand and replies to Komodo that he likes it. The man with the scar on his face is stunned, questioning how his opponent did that so easily. As if playing with a doll, Bak Do-chan starts to swing his opponent around. But Komodo calls him an old man and then lands a knee strike to his face. Once again, Bak Do-chan shows his skill by blocking the hit without difficulty. Seeing this, Komodo realizes the guy really is amazing. The lunatic starts shouting that he's happy, since Pitten is much better than the rumors. Easily slipping free from his rival's grip, he escapes. Then he leaps onto the wall while saying that just so Bake knows he was among the best in Iskra when it came to knife fights. And Pitten had made a huge mistake by giving him that weapon. He then charges and slashes Pitten across the chest. Komodo realizes that for some reason, he didn't hit his opponent, questioning how the hell that's possible. Once more, he makes a move with the blade, trying to stab Pitten. And again, he questions what the hell is going on. Komodo asks how that guy is doing this. He's sure he cut him. So the Scarface man steps back while thinking that Bak Do-chan reminds him of Amber Tiger. Before he can even process what he just thought, Pitten hits him with a punch to the face that sends him flying backward. The assassin spits blood as he nearly passes out for a few seconds. Quickly, he recovers, returning with a fluid motion to cut Pitten. But the man is far stronger than he expected, and the brute lands another punch, this time to his opponent's chest. With that blow, the blonde man starts to pass out, coughing up even more blood and thinking he never had a chance. To finish it off, the assassin kicks Komodo, launching him far away. While flying meters through the air, Komodo thinks he never stood a chance. Pitten was far too strong. He crashes to the ground while admitting that that guy really is an assassin. Bak Do-chan stares at his defeated opponent for a few seconds while smiling terrifyingly. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.